The 8-year-old Orphan held out a sketchpad to the Mafia Boss in the marble gallery, her small voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I sketched the man who stole her." Grant Holloway looked down at the charcoal portrait, and the face staring back destroyed him because it was Cole Bishop, the man he'd trusted like a brother, now revealed as a monster. The cold, untouchable crime lord went dangerously still, his entire world shattering in the space between one breath and the next. Grant Holloway moved through the Metropolitan Cultural Center's charity exhibition with the kind of quiet authority that made security personnel straighten their postures without conscious thought. His tailored charcoal suit was designed for invisibility among the city's elite, though the tactical awareness in his pale gray eyes suggested he belonged to a different world entirely. He'd accepted the invitation not from philanthropic interest but strategic calculation. These cultural events drew the kind of power brokers who controlled city permits, zoning boards, and the subtle machinery of legitimate business that concealed his empire's foundation. The vaulted ceilings and Renaissance paintings provided perfect cover for conversations that shaped territories and eliminated competition without a single raised voice. Grant had built his operation through surgical precision rather than theatrical violence, understanding that true power required both the wolf's instinct and the shepherd's patience. Tonight's gala represented controlled reconnaissance, opportunities disguised as polite conversation near marble sculptures worth more than most men's lives. In a smaller gallery adjacent to the main exhibition hall, June sat cross-legged on the polished hardwood floor, her sketchpad balanced on her knees as charcoal dust collected on her worn group home cardigan. The museum's outreach program had given her temporary escape from the institutional beige walls and supervised mealtimes that defined her existence. Her drawings weren't the simple crayon scribbles most 8-year-olds produced, but eerily accurate portraits that captured something essential about her subjects: the tension in a businessman's jaw, the calculated warmth in a politician's smile, the predatory stillness in a security guard's posture. She'd learned early that adults dismissed children's observations, so she'd stopped speaking her truths and started drawing them instead. Tonight's event had brought more interesting faces than usual: men in Italian leather shoes who moved with dancer's grace, women whose jewelry probably cost more than a year's worth of group home funding. June absorbed every detail with the desperate intensity of someone storing evidence against an uncertain future, her pencil translating observation into testimony that no one had yet bothered to read. Audrey Dora navigated the crowd with an iPad in hand, confirming that the educational displays remained accessible and that the young participants from the outreach program felt welcomed rather than tolerated. She'd built this initiative from nothing over 4 years, convincing the museum's board that art belonged to everyone, not just those who could afford exclusive galas and private viewings. Her dress was simple navy compared to the designer gowns surrounding her, but she wore it with the confidence that came from knowing her value wasn't measured in silk or social connections. When she glanced toward the children's corner, she spotted June in her usual position back against the wall, sightlines clear to all exits, sketchpad held like a shield, the girl who never sought attention but missed nothing. Audrey had watched June for 3 months now, noting the way the child documented faces with almost photographic precision, translating the adult world into charcoal evidence that sometimes made viewers uncomfortable with its accuracy. There was something haunted in June's focus, a survivor's awareness that didn't belong in someone so young. The museum director tapped a microphone to gather attention, his practiced voice carrying across the exhibition hall as he began formal remarks about cultural preservation and community investment. Grant only half listened, his focus split between scanning for threats and identifying which guests represented opportunities worth cultivating. He'd learned decades ago that safety required layered awareness, never trusting a single system or perspective when survival hung in the balance. These events represented controlled risk, public enough that open violence was impossible, exclusive enough that screening had meaning. His fingers drummed once against his thigh, a rare tell of impatience, before he forced them still. The curator's presentation droned on about artistic techniques and donor recognition, while guests shifted weight and calculated how long before they could politely drift toward the catering tables. June had stopped drawing mid-stroke, her attention caught by something she couldn't quite articulate: a wrongness in the pattern of movement she'd been tracking. A man she'd sketched 20 minutes earlier stood too close to one of the staff-only doorways, his posture casual but his eyes scanning with purpose that didn't match the relaxed gathering. She flipped to a fresh page and began a new drawing, her hand moving quickly to capture his features before he moved again. The precise angle of his jaw, the way his security badge hung slightly crooked, the particular tension in his shoulders that suggested coiled violence beneath the professional exterior. Something about him made June's stomach tighten with the same instinct that had kept her alive through 3 years of institutional care and 4 different foster placements. Her charcoal pressed harder against paper, darkening the lines around his eyes, catching the micro-expression that transformed his pleasant face into something predatory when he thought no one was watching. Grant's phone buzzed silently against his ribs. A message from his external security confirming all exit points remained clear and unremarkable. Standard protocol. Everything by the numbers. He slipped the phone back into his jacket's interior pocket and allowed himself a measured exhale. The formal presentation concluded with polite applause, and the crowd began flowing toward the adjoining galleries, where hors d'oeuvres were arranged on tables draped in ivory linen. That's when June stood up, her small frame moving with purpose through the shifting crowd, her sketchpad clutched against her chest like evidence she couldn't afford to lose. She'd made a decision in that moment, a calculation born from being dismissed by police officers, social workers, and every adult who'd promised to listen but never actually heard. This man, the one with the cold gray eyes and the stillness that suggested lethal capability, might actually act on what she knew. She'd been watching him for 40 minutes, noting the way security deferred to him, the way other powerful men gave him space, the way he assessed threats with the same hypervigilance that kept her alive. June wove between designer gowns and tailored suits until she stood directly in front of Grant Holloway, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She held out her sketchpad with both hands, her small voice steady despite her trembling fingers. "I sketched the man who stole her," June whispered, her dark eyes meeting his with desperate certainty. "I sketched the man who stole Eliza." Grant's attention dropped to the page, his expression shifting from polite dismissal to absolute stillness in the space of a heartbeat. The drawing was flawless, not a child's approximation, but a photorealistic charcoal portrait that captured every detail of the subject's face. The strong jawline, the particular set of the eyes, the small scar above the left eyebrow from a knife fight 15 years ago. Cole Bishop, Grant's most trusted advisor, the man who organized his security protocols, the man he'd promoted from enforcer to confidant over a decade of proven loyalty, the man he'd trusted with his life, his operation, his most carefully guarded vulnerabilities, the man who was supposed to be a brother. The sight of that face, rendered in charcoal by an 8-year-old's unflinching observation, was a blow that went beyond shock or anger. It destroyed something fundamental in Grant's carefully constructed identity, the belief that his judgment was infallible, that loyalty could be earned through strategic generosity, that the family he'd built from broken men and calculated alliances was something real. Grant didn't cry. His face didn't betray emotion in the way civilians express trauma. He simply went dangerously still, his eyes turning to frost, his breathing controlled to the point of imperceptible. The cold, powerful Mafia Boss, broken by an intimate truth delivered through a child's art. He carefully took the sketchpad from June's hands, his movements precise despite the seismic destruction happening behind his expression. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only June could hear, and that quietness carried more threat than any raised voice could contain. "Where is she? Where is Eliza?" June shook her head, her eyes filling with frustrated tears. "I don't know. I only saw him take her 3 days ago, at the community center near the group home. No one believed me." Grant's jaw clenched once the only visible crack in his control. He turned slightly, making brief eye contact with Audrey Dora, who'd been watching the interaction with growing concern. His voice remained low but carried absolute command. "Hey, if this story touches your heart even a little, go ahead and subscribe, join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's share this journey together. Miss Dora, I need you to take this child somewhere private. Now, don't let her out of your sight, and don't speak to anyone about what you've just witnessed." Grant's eyes returned to June, and for the first time, the child saw something human beneath the predatory stillness, a desperate, protective fury that recognized her bravery. "You did the right thing coming to me. You're safe now." He handed the sketchpad to a nearby man who'd materialized at his elbow, security dressed as a guest, instantly responsive to unspoken command. Grant's voice dropped to a lethal whisper meant only for his operative. "Secure Bishop's location. No direct contact. I want surveillance on him in the next 10 minutes, and I want every exit from this building monitored. If he moves, I want to know before he takes his next breath." Grant paused, his hand tightening on the sketchpad until his knuckles went white. "And find Eliza Romano. 3 days missing. Probability she's still alive?" The operative's expression flickered with recognition of the name Eliza Romano, daughter of Grant's former mentor, the man who'd taught him everything before betraying the family and disappearing into witness protection 8 years ago. A debt Grant had promised to honor by protecting the daughter his mentor left behind. I'll mobilize the full network, boss. Do it quietly. Bishop can't know we're coming until I'm standing in front of him. Grant's voice carried the kind of cold certainty that preceded violence. I need to be alone. Grant watched Audrey lead June toward a private office, the child's small hand gripped tight in the program coordinator's protective grasp. Then he turned and walked with measured precision toward the museum's east wing, where private viewing rooms offered soundproof isolation. The moment the door closed behind him, Grant Holloway, the man who'd built an empire on calculated control, who'd survived 3 decades in a world where emotion was weakness, pressed his palms flat against the marble wall and forced himself to breathe through the destruction happening in his chest. Cole Bishop, his brother in everything but blood, the man he'd trusted to protect his operation, the man who'd saved his life twice, the man who'd stood beside him through territorial wars and federal investigations and the slow, brutal climb from street enforcer to untouchable power. A traitor, a predator, a monster wearing the face of family. And Grant had been too blind, too arrogant, too confident in his own judgment to see it. He looked down at the sketchpad still clutched in his hand, at June's devastating portrait of betrayal, and felt something crack in the foundation of his identity. The cold, untouchable mafia boss who'd never lost control, who'd built his reputation on infallible instinct, that man was gone, shattered by the truth delivered through a child's art. What remained was something more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and a brother to destroy. Grant pulled out his phone, his hands steady despite the internal devastation, and began making calls that would dismantle Cole Bishop's existence one calculated move at a time. The hunt had begun. The safe house was a penthouse in Tribeca that didn't appear on any deed or tax record. 23 floors of steel and bulletproof glass purchased through shell corporations that dissolved the moment the ink dried. Grant had built his empire on locations like this, places where problems could be contained and solutions implemented without witnesses or paper trails. He guided June through the reinforced door with a hand that barely touched her shoulder, aware that the child flinched at sudden movements despite her extraordinary bravery at the museum. Audrey Dora followed 3 steps behind, her earlier cooperation now tempered by visible suspicion as she took in the industrial-grade security system and the kind of minimalist luxury that suggested serious money with serious things to hide. Grant caught her expression and filed it away for later management. Right now, she was necessary, the only bridge to a traumatized child who'd stopped speaking the moment they'd left the museum's public spaces. June stood in the center of the main room, still clutching her sketchpad, her eyes tracking every exit and shadow with the hypervigilance of someone who'd survived by always knowing where danger might emerge. She hadn't said a word during the 15-minute drive, hadn't responded to Audrey's gentle questions or reassurances, just that white-knuckled grip on her drawings and a stillness that made her seem even smaller than her 8 years. Grant crouched down to June's eye level, moving slowly enough that she could track his approach. His voice, when he spoke, had lost the lethal edge from the museum, replaced by something careful and unexpectedly gentle. You're safe here. No one knows about this place except the people I trust completely. And right now, that's a very short list. He paused, watching June's dark eyes assess him with disturbing adult awareness. I need to ask you some questions about what you saw, about the man in your drawing. But I need you to understand something first. I believe you. Everything you're about to tell me, I will act on. Do you understand? June's grip on the sketchpad loosened fractionally. She gave a single, small nod. Good. Grant straightened and gestured to the sectional sofa that dominated one wall. Miss Dora is going to stay with you. I need to make some calls, but I'll be in the next room where you can see me through that glass wall. If you need anything at all, you tell her, and she tells me. Okay? Another nod. June moved to the sofa with the same careful precision she'd used, navigating the museum, choosing the corner position that gave her sightlines to both exits and the wall of windows overlooking the city. Audrey sat beside her, maintaining careful distance, her professional warmth now edged with the kind of protective concern that came from years of working with vulnerable children. Grant walked to the glass-walled office adjacent to the main room, pulling out his phone as the door sealed behind him with an almost imperceptible hiss. The soundproofing was military-grade, but he could still see June, and Audrey clearly could monitor the child's body language for signs of distress, while he made the calls that would either save Eliza or confirm his worst fears. His first call went to Marcus Reed, his head of security and one of 3 people Grant trusted without reservation. Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of someone who already knew the situation was critical. Talk to me, boss. I need Bishop's location within the hour. Full surveillance but zero contact. He can't know we're watching. Grant's jaw tightened. And Marcus, this stays between us. No one else in the organization knows Bishop is compromised. Not yet. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. You're sure about this? Bishop's been your right hand for. I'm looking at a sketch that puts him at the scene of Eliza Romano's abduction 3 days ago. The artist is an 8-year-old with photographic observation skills and zero reason to lie. Grant's voice dropped to something colder. I'm sure. Now find him. On it. What about the rest of the capos? They're going to notice if you pull Bishop's security clearances without explanation. Let them notice. If anyone asks, tell them it's a routine audit triggered by the Romano situation. Keep them focused on external threats while we handle this internally. Grant turned to watch June through the glass, seeing the child's fingers moving unconsciously as though still drawing. And Marcus? The girl who gave me the sketch, she's now the most protected asset in my operation. I want eyes on this location 24/7, rotating teams, no one person knowing the full security layout. If Bishop somehow learns about her existence, he'll try to eliminate the witness. Understood? I'll have the surveillance package on Bishop within 45 minutes. Grant disconnected and immediately dialed his second call, this one to a contact in the NYPD's missing persons unit who'd been on his payroll for 6 years. The conversation was brief and transactional. Any information on Eliza Romano's case was to be routed directly to Grant, and the official investigation was to proceed slowly enough that it wouldn't interfere with his own hunt. The detective asked no questions, having learned long ago that Grant's money came with the understanding that curiosity was expensive. The third call was the one Grant had been dreading. He pulled up the contact labeled simply A.C. and hit dial, his chest tightening with each ring. Audrey Dora answered after the fourth ring, her voice carrying clear suspicion. Mr. Holloway, I'm assuming this isn't a social call. I need your help. The admission felt like swallowing glass, but Grant forced the words out anyway. June hasn't spoken since we left the museum. You've been working with her for months. You understand how she communicates better than anyone else. I need you to stay with her. Help her feel safe enough to tell us everything she knows about what she witnessed. And why exactly should I help you with anything? Audrey's tone had gone sharp. You just pulled a traumatized child out of a public event, brought her to what looks like a very expensive hiding place, and made it clear that you're involved in something well beyond legitimate business. For all I know, you're the threat she needs protection from. Grant glanced through the glass wall, watching June's small form curled into the corner of the sofa, still clutching her sketchpad like a lifeline. If I were a threat to her, she wouldn't have approached me at the museum. Children who've survived the system June's been through have instincts about danger, and she chose to trust me with information that's clearly terrified her for days. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The man in her sketch abducted a 4-year-old girl 3 days ago. That man works for me, or he did, until I saw June's drawing, which means I'm the only person with both the resources and the motivation to find that girl before it's too late. And June is the only witness who can help me do it. The silence stretched long enough that Grant thought Audrey might hang up. Then he heard her exhale slowly. I need you to understand something, Mr. Holloway. I don't trust you, and I don't trust whatever world you operate in that requires safe houses and surveillance teams. But I trust June's instincts, and I trust that she's in real danger from whoever took that girl. Audrey's voice hardened. So I'll stay. I'll help her communicate. But the moment I think you're using her for something other than finding that missing teenager, I'm taking her straight to the police and damn the consequences. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Grant felt something in his chest loosen slightly, not relief exactly, but the recognition that June would have the protection she needed even if Grant's hunt for Bishop went sideways. Thank you, Miss Dora. Don't thank me yet. Just find that girl. Grant disconnected and returned to the main room, where Audrey was showing June something on her phone photos from previous museum programs, familiar faces that seemed to ease some of the tension in the child's shoulders. June looked up when Grant approached, her dark eyes meeting his with that same desperate certainty from the museum. I need to ask you about the day you saw the man take Eliza, Grant said quietly, settling into the chair across from them. Can you show me? In your drawings? June flipped through her sketchpad with careful precision, past the portraits from tonight's gala, past earlier drawings of museum visitors and group home staff, until she reached a page that made Grant's hands curl into fists. The sketch showed a community center parking lot. June had captured every detail with photographic accuracy. A white van with partial plates visible, a teenage girl with long dark hair being guided forcefully toward the vehicle, and Cole Bishop, his face rendered in perfect detail, one hand gripping the girl's arm while the other pressed something small against her side. A gun, Grant realized. Cole had used a gun to control Eliza, which meant he'd planned this carefully enough to bring a weapon to a public abduction. Where is this? Grant kept his voice level despite the fury building in his chest. June's finger pointed to text she'd written carefully at the bottom of the page. Street Catherine's Community Center, Bronx, Tuesday, 4:47 p.m. And you tried to tell someone before coming to me? June nodded, her eyes filling with frustrated tears. She flipped to another page where she'd written in careful block letters. Told police. Didn't believe. Said I was making stories. Told group home director. Said stop seeking attention. Grant read the words and felt something crack further in his already fractured understanding of the world. This child had witnessed an abduction, had documented it with extraordinary detail, had tried to report it through proper channels, and every adult she'd approached had dismissed her as an attention-seeking liar. I believe you, Grant said, his voice rough. And I'm going to find Eliza. But June, the man in your drawing, the one who took her. Did you see where he went after the parking lot? Did you see anything else that might tell us where he's keeping her? June shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. She grabbed her charcoal and began drawing with desperate speed, her hand moving across a fresh page. Within 60 seconds, she'd sketched Cole Bishop's face again, but this time something was different. June had captured an expression Grant had never seen before, a cold satisfaction, a predatory pleasure that Cole had always hidden beneath professional competence. Audrey leaned closer, her voice soft. June, honey, is there anything else you remember? Any detail, no matter how small? June's charcoal pressed harder, adding shadows around Cole's eyes, darkening the lines of his mouth. Then she wrote beneath the portrait. He smiled. When he put her in the van. He smiled. Grant stood abruptly, his control fracturing for half a second before he forced it back into place. Cole Bishop had smiled while abducting a 4-year-old girl, had taken pleasure in the act, which meant this wasn't business or strategy or even revenge. This was something personal and sick and deliberately cruel. Grant's phone buzzed Marcus with the surveillance update. He walked back to the office, leaving Audrey to comfort June, and answered with a single word. Talk. Bishop's at his apartment in Chelsea, alone. Acting normal, ordered takeout. Watching TV. No indication he knows he's burned. Marcus paused. But boss, we pulled his financial records. 3 days ago, he withdrew $50,000 in cash, and his phone's GPS puts him in the Bronx at 4:47 p.m. on Tuesday, exactly when the kid said the abduction happened. Grant closed his eyes, the confirmation hitting like a physical blow. Keep the surveillance active. I want to know every move he makes. And Marcus, start building a case file. Every transaction, every communication, every goddamn place he's been in the last 6 months. If Cole's been planning this, there will be a trail. Find it. Already on it. What's the play here, boss? Do we bring him in for questioning? Not yet. Right now he thinks he's safe. That's our only advantage. Grant opened his eyes, his reflection in the glass wall showing a man he barely recognized, older, harder, stripped of the certainty that had defined him for decades. We let him think he got away with it. And we follow every thread until it leads us to Eliza. Then I handle Cole personally. Grant returned to find June asleep on the sofa, her head resting on Audrey's lap, her sketch pad still clutched loosely in one hand. Audrey looked up, her expression unreadable. She's exhausted, probably hasn't slept properly in days. Audrey's hand moved carefully through June's hair, the gesture protective. What happens now? Now we wait for my people to find the connections. June's given us the starting point, the rest is detective work and leverage. Grant moved to the windows, staring out at the city where Cole Bishop was eating takeout and pretending to be innocent. You should stay here tonight. There's a guest room upstairs. June will need familiar faces when she wakes up. And what will you be doing? Hunting a traitor. Grant's voice was quiet, lethal, and praying we're not already too late. Dawn broke over Tribeca in shades of steel and amber, light filtering through bulletproof glass to wake Grant from a sleep he hadn't intended to take. He'd crashed on the office sofa sometime around 4 a.m., his phone still clutched in one hand, surrounded by printouts of Cole Bishop's financial records and movement patterns that Marcus had compiled throughout the night. The data painted a disturbing picture. Cole had been planning this for months, possibly longer, each transaction and location carefully calculated to avoid detection. Grant stood and moved to the main room, where he found June already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her sketch pad, drawing with the focused intensity that seemed to define her existence. Audrey was in the Kit Dora area, making coffee with the kind of territorial efficiency that suggested she'd already claimed this space as her temporary domain. "She's been drawing for 20 minutes, Audrey said quietly, not looking up from the coffee maker. "Hasn't said anything, but she's calmer than last night. I think having a full night's sleep in a safe place helped." Grant moved closer to June, careful not to startle her, and crouched down to see what she was working on. His chest tightened. June had drawn a window perfectly rendered with the kind of architectural detail that suggested she was drawing from memory rather than imagination. The window was barred, the glass dirty, and through it, June had sketched a partial view of industrial structures. A water tower, part of a brick building with distinctive Gothic Revival details. And in the corner, barely visible, the edge of a street sign. "June," Grant said carefully, "is this where Eliza is? Is this what you saw?" June shook her head, frustration evident in the tight line of her mouth. She flipped back through her sketch pad to the original drawing of the abduction, then forward again to the window. Her finger moved between the two images. Then she grabbed her charcoal and began writing beneath the window sketch. Not saw, dreamed, but real. Eliza there. Grant exchanged a glance with Audrey, who'd moved closer with 2 mugs of coffee. The program coordinator's expression mixed skepticism with concern. "Dreams aren't evidence," Audrey said gently. "June, honey, are you sure you saw these details somewhere? Maybe in a photo or—" June's charcoal pressed so hard against the paper it nearly tore. She wrote in angry block letters, "Not making up. No, it's real. Same as knowing Bishop bad." Grant studied the drawing more carefully. His instincts the same instincts that had built an empire and survived 3 decades of territorial wars, telling him June was onto something. Children who'd survived trauma often developed hyper-awareness that looked like intuition but was actually pattern recognition operating at unconscious levels. June had documented Cole's predatory micro-expressions before consciously understanding what they meant. Maybe her subconscious had also cataloged environmental details that seemed like dreams but were actually memories. "Marcus," Grant said into his phone, not bothering with greetings. "I need you to run an analysis on industrial locations in the 5 boroughs, looking for buildings with Gothic Revival architecture, water towers, barred windows, probably older structures, possibly abandoned or minimally occupied. That's going to be a long list, boss. Then narrow it by Cole Bishop's financial transactions and known associates. Anywhere he could have access without raising suspicions." Grant paused, studying June's sketch of the street sign corner. "And Marcus, have the surveillance team reported any movement?" Bishop left his apartment 40 minutes ago, grabbed coffee at his usual place, then drove to a storage facility in Red Hook. "Been inside for 30 minutes. We've got eyes on all exits." Grant's pulse quickened. A storage facility was exactly the kind of location where someone could keep supplies for a kidnapping or prepare to move a captive. "Get me the address and pull the rental records for that facility. I want to know when Bishop acquired that unit and what he's been storing there." He disconnected and found both Audrey and June watching him with identical expressions of tense hope. "Your drawing might have just given us our first real lead," Grant said to June. "But I need you to keep working. If you remember anything else, any detail, no matter how small, draw it immediately. Can you do that?" June nodded, already flipping to a fresh page. Her charcoal moved across the paper, this time sketching what looked like a distinctive architectural detail. A stone gargoyle or decorative corbel that matched the Gothic Revival elements from her window drawing. "Beneath it," she wrote, "on building next to where Eliza is." Grant photographed the sketch with his phone and sent it directly to Marcus with instructions to cross-reference it against the location database. Then he settled into the chair across from June, watching her work with a mixture of awe and desperate hope. Audrey sat beside him, her coffee mug warming her hands, her voice pitched low enough that June couldn't hear. "You said the man in her drawing, Cole Bishop, works for you. What exactly does that mean? What kind of organization are you running that employs people who abduct teenagers?" Grant had been expecting this question. He'd spent the early morning hours debating how much truth to share with Audrey, knowing that her cooperation depended on trust but also knowing that full disclosure would put her at risk. He settled on a version of honesty that split the difference. "I run a private security and acquisitions firm. Legitimate on paper, less legitimate in practice. We handle problems for people who can't go through official channels: debt collection, asset recovery, personal protection. Cole Bishop was my head of operations, responsible for vetting contracts and managing field teams. He had access to resources, connections, and information that most people in my organization don't." Grant's jaw tightened, which means he also had the capability to use those resources for personal purposes without raising immediate red flags. And you never suspected? In however many years he worked for you? Audrey's tone wasn't accusatory, just genuinely curious. 10 years. And no, I didn't suspect. Cole saved my life twice. Once from a rival operation that tried to kill me. Once from a federal investigation that could have dismantled everything I'd built. He was loyal, competent, and exactly the kind of operator I needed to scale my business from street-level enforcement to corporate acquisitions. Grant stared at June's sketch of Cole's smiling face. I trusted him completely. Which was apparently my first mistake. What was your second mistake? Assuming that loyalty could be bought with opportunity and respect. I gave Cole everything: authority, money, access to my inner circle. I thought that was enough. Grant's voice went quiet. But looking at these drawings, at the planning this required, I'm realizing the betrayal isn't recent. Cole's been nursing some grievance for years, hiding it beneath professional competence until he saw his chance to strike. Audrey was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee mug. June trusted you with this information because she sensed something in you, some core of integrity beneath whatever criminal enterprise you're running. Don't make her regret that trust by using this situation for anything other than saving that girl. I won't. Grant met Audrey's eyes directly. Eliza Romano is the daughter of the man who taught me everything about this business, before he betrayed our organization and disappeared into witness protection. I promised him before he left that I would keep his daughter safe. Cole knew about that promise. He knew Eliza was one of the few people I had a personal obligation to protect, which means taking her wasn't random opportunity. It was calculated to hurt me in the most devastating way possible. Jesus. Audrey set down her coffee mug. So this is personal revenge? This is Cole destroying everything I care about, while making sure I know he's responsible. Grant's hands curled into fists. The question is why? What happened between us that would justify this level of betrayal? His phone buzzed Marcus again, this time with information that made Grant's chest tighten. Boss, we've got something. Cole's storage unit in Red Hook? It's registered under a shell company that traces back to someone named Bishop Holdings LLC. Dig deeper. And that company was formed 12 years ago, 2 years before Cole started working for you. What? Yeah. And get this, the registered address for Bishop Holdings? It's the same location as a property that was seized in a federal raid back then. Your property, boss. The warehouse operation that got shut down right before you pivoted to legitimate acquisitions. Grant felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. That was the raid that sent 3 of my best people to prison. Cole was working enforcement for a rival operation back then. He stopped, memory surfacing with crystal precision. He lost his brother in that raid. Michael Bishop. He was one of the men we had to sacrifice to make the federal charges stick on possession rather than conspiracy. You think Cole's brother was involved in whatever he's storing at that facility? I think Cole has been planning revenge for 12 years. Ever since I made the strategic decision to let his brother take the fall to protect the rest of the organization. Grant's voice was hollow. He infiltrated my operation, worked his way into my trust, and waited for the perfect moment to destroy me from the inside. Taking Eliza isn't about ransom or leverage. It's about making me feel the same loss he felt when Michael died in prison. June had stopped drawing, her dark eyes fixed on Grant with disturbing comprehension. She flipped to a fresh page and began sketching rapidly, this time drawing 2 faces side by side, Cole Bishop on the left, and on the right, a man who bore striking resemblance to Cole but younger, with softer features and less predatory awareness. Beneath the portraits, June wrote, "Brothers, one dead, one broken." Grant stared at the sketch, at June's intuitive understanding of the grief that had motivated Cole's betrayal. "How did you—" June pointed to Cole's portrait from the original abduction sketch, then to the smile she'd captured. She wrote quickly, "Smiled like someone who waited long time, smiled like revenge." "She's right," Audrey said quietly. "Whatever Cole Bishop is doing, it's not impulsive. This is methodical punishment." Grant's phone rang Marcus again, his voice tight with urgency. "Boss, Bishop just left the storage facility, and he's carrying something looks like a duffel bag, heavy enough that it's affecting his gait. He's heading toward the waterfront. Stay on him. I want to know every stop." Grant was already moving toward the door, grabbing his jacket. "And Marcus? Get a team ready to breach that storage unit the moment Bishop is clear. I want to know what he's keeping there." He turned back to find Audrey and June watching him, both wearing expressions that demanded inclusion rather than protection. "I'm going with you," Audrey said before Grant could speak. "If you're about to do something dangerous, June needs familiar faces around when you get back. And if you're not coming back," she glanced at the child, Then I need to know so I can get her somewhere truly safe. Grant wanted to argue, wanted to order Audrey to stay behind where civilian complications wouldn't compromise his operational flexibility. But the look in her eyes, protective, determined, absolutely unwilling to negotiate, reminded him that June's safety required more than just physical security. It required trust. Fine, but you stay in the vehicle. No arguments. Grant looked at June, who'd already started packing her sketchpad with the careful precision of someone preparing for sudden evacuation. June, I need you to keep drawing. Anything else you remember about that window, that building, those details, it all matters. Can you do that while we're moving? June nodded, her small face set with determination that didn't belong on someone her age. They took the armored SUV from the building's private garage, Marcus driving while Grant monitored the surveillance feed on his phone. Cole Bishop's location pinged steadily toward Red Hook's industrial waterfront, the same area where Grant had run operations a decade ago, before pivoting to legitimate acquisitions. The symmetry was deliberate. Grant realized Cole was taking him back to the place where it all started, where Michael Bishop had died, and Cole's revenge had been born. June sat in the back seat beside Audrey, her charcoal moving across paper with focused intensity. Every few minutes, she'd hold up a new sketch, another architectural detail, another fragment of the location her subconscious had stored. Grant photographed each one and forwarded them to Marcus's team, building a composite picture of where Eliza might be held. Boss, Marcus said from the driver's seat. Cole just pulled into an abandoned sugar refinery at the edge of the waterfront district. GPS coordinates match one of the properties on our Gothic Revival database. Stone gargoyles on the eastern facade, water tower on the roof, barred windows throughout. It's a perfect match for June's sketches. Grant felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear exactly, but the recognition that they were walking into a trap Cole had spent 12 years preparing. How long has Cole been inside? 3 minutes. He's alone as far as thermal imaging shows, but the building's got multiple levels and enough interference that we can't get a complete read. Then we go in quiet. 2-person entry team, the rest positioned on exits in case Cole tries to run. Grant glanced back at June, who'd gone very still, her eyes wide. Audrey, keep her in the vehicle. Doors locked, engine running. If anything goes wrong, if you hear gunshots or lose communication, you drive straight to the address I'm sending you now. It's another safe house. You stay there until Marcus or I contact you personally. Understood? Audrey's face had gone pale, but she nodded. Understood. She gripped Grant's arm. Don't do anything stupid. June's already lost too many adults who promised to help. I don't plan to be another one. Grant squeezed her hand once, then exited the vehicle into the gray morning light. The sugar refinery loomed ahead, Gothic Revival architecture now crumbling and covered in decades of industrial decay. Grant could see the gargoyles June had drawn, the water tower, the barred windows that had somehow imprinted themselves on a child's subconscious. Every detail matched, which meant Cole Bishop had Eliza Romano somewhere inside that building, and Grant was about to find out if June's intuition and his own desperate hope were enough to save her. The interior of the sugar refinery was exactly what Grant expected from a building that had been abandoned for 2 decades. Broken windows filtering gray morning light across rusted machinery, industrial detritus scattered like archaeological evidence of capitalism's failures, and the particular smell of decay that came from places where humans no longer bothered maintaining their claim. Grant moved through the ground floor with Marcus at his side, both men armed and operating in the kind of silent coordination that came from years of working together in situations where mistakes were fatal. The thermal imaging had been right, no heat signatures on the ground level, which meant Cole had gone deeper into the structure or higher up where the equipment couldn't penetrate. Grant signaled for Marcus to clear the eastern stairwell while he took the western access, both men moving with practiced efficiency through shadows that could hide a dozen threats. Grant's phone buzzed silently, a text from Audrey in the vehicle outside. June drew something new, sending image now. The photo showed another sketch, this one depicting a basement level with distinctive brick archways and what looked like old steam pipes running along the ceiling. In the center of the drawing, June had sketched a small figure huddled against a wall. Eliza, Grant realized, captured in a moment of terrified isolation. And in the corner of the sketch, barely visible, June had drawn what looked like a timer or some kind of digital display. Grant's chest tightened. He forwarded the image to Marcus with a single word: basement. They found the access stairs behind a collapsed section of industrial shelving, concrete steps leading down into darkness that smelled of mildew and something else: recent human occupation. Fresh air meant ventilation, which meant Cole had prepared this space for extended use. Grant descended carefully, his weapon drawn, his breathing controlled to near silence. The basement opened into exactly what June had drawn: brick archways, steam pipes, industrial architecture that belonged to an era when this building had employed hundreds of workers processing Caribbean sugar into American profit. And in the far corner, chained to one of those pipes, was a teenage girl with long dark hair and the kind of hollow-eyed terror that came from days of captivity. Eliza Romano, alive. Grant moved toward her, signaling Marcus to secure the perimeter. But he'd barely taken 3 steps when Cole Bishop emerged from the shadows near the eastern archway, a gun held loosely in one hand and an expression of cold satisfaction on his face. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find us," Cole said, his voice carrying the same professional competence he'd used in 1,000 business conversations. 12 hours since you saw that kid's drawing? I'm disappointed, Grant. I thought you'd be faster." Grant kept his weapon trained on Cole, his voice carefully neutral despite the fury building in his chest. "Let the girl go. Whatever grievance you have, it's with me, not her. That's where you're wrong." Cole's smile was the same predatory expression June had captured in her sketch: cold, patient, satisfied. "My grievance is with the man who sacrificed my brother to protect his empire. The man who made Michael Bishop take the fall for conspiracy charges while you walked away with barely a slap on the wrist. The man who built a fortune on the backs of people he considered expendable." Cole's gun moved slightly, still not quite aimed at anyone but carrying implicit threat. "Eliza Romano is the daughter of the man who taught you everything, who brought you into this life, who trusted you to protect what mattered to him. Taking her is the same favor you did for me 12 years ago. I'm giving you the experience of watching someone you're supposed to protect suffer because of your choices." Michael's death wasn't strategic. It was survival. Grant's voice stayed level, though his mind was racing through tactical options. Marcus was positioned behind Cole, but not close enough for a clean shot without risking Eliza in the crossfire. The federal raid was going to take down the entire organization. Someone had to take the conspiracy charge, and Michael was already facing possession counts that would have sent him away for 20 years regardless. "I made the choice that saved 15 other people, including you. You made the choice that killed my brother." Cole's composure cracked for the first time, his voice rising with 12 years of suppressed grief. "Michael died in prison 3 years into his sentence because you put him there. And you didn't even have the decency to acknowledge what you'd done, just moved on to your next acquisition, your next strategy, your next profitable quarter. Like Michael's life was a line item in a ledger you could write off." Grant felt the truth of Cole's accusation hit like a physical blow. He'd made the strategic calculation 12 years ago, with the cold efficiency that had defined his entire operation. Minimize losses, protect the organization's viability, accept that some sacrifices were necessary for the greater survival. Michael Bishop had been one of those sacrifices, and Grant had filed away the guilt without examining it too closely, because examining it would have compromised his ability to make similar decisions in the future. "You're right," Grant said quietly, the admission costing him. "I sacrificed your brother to save the organization, and I never apologized. Never acknowledged the cost to you personally. I just moved forward, because that's what leaders do in this world: make impossible choices and live with the consequences. Except you didn't live with the consequences. I did." Cole's gun hand steadied, his finger moving to the trigger. "I spent 3 years watching my brother deteriorate in federal prison, another year burying him and dealing with the aftermath, and then 8 years infiltrating your organization and earning your trust. All so I could be standing here right now, making you finally understand what you took from me. So you took Eliza. You used your access to my operations to target the one person I had a personal obligation to protect." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's not justice, Cole. That's just perpetuating the same cycle of betrayal and violence that killed Michael in the first place." "Maybe, but it's also the only language you understand." Cole glanced at Eliza, who'd been watching the confrontation with terrified comprehension. "She's not hurt. I fed her, gave her water, even let her keep a book I found in the storage facility. I'm not a monster, Grant. I'm just someone demanding you finally pay the price you've been avoiding for 12 years. What price? You want me dead? You want my operation dismantled? You want me to confess to federal authorities?" Grant spread his arms slightly, weapon still held but no longer directly aimed at Cole. "Tell me what you actually want, because right now you're just torturing a 4-year-old girl to make a point about grief that I already understand." Cole's expression flickered something vulnerable, breaking through the cold satisfaction for just a moment. "I want you to admit that Michael mattered, that his life wasn't just a strategic calculation, but an actual human cost that should have weighed on you every single day since you made that choice. I want you to look at Eliza Romano and understand what it feels like to fail someone you're supposed to protect. And then, Cole's voice went quiet, lethal. Then I want you to live with it the way I've had to live with Michael's death. I do live with it. Grant's voice was raw in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in decades. Michael Bishop's death is one of 13 names I carry from decisions I made that cost people their lives. I know their faces, their histories, the families they left behind. And yes, I made those choices strategically, with cold calculation, because that's what survival required in the world we operated in. But that doesn't mean I don't understand the cost. Then why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you acknowledge what you'd taken from me? Because acknowledging it would have required admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability in this business gets you killed. Grant's hands lowered slowly, his weapon pointing at the ground in a gesture of deliberate de-escalation. But Cole Michael's death broke something in me too. It was the moment I realized that the cold, calculating efficiency I'd built my entire identity around had a price I wasn't sure I could keep paying. That's why I pivoted to legitimate acquisitions, why I started distancing myself from street-level operations, because I was trying to build something that didn't require constant sacrifice of the people closest to me. Cole studied Grant's face with the intensity of someone searching for deception. You never told anyone that. I never told anyone a lot of things. Grant's voice dropped to something almost gentle, including the fact that I blamed myself for Michael's death, long before you started planning this revenge, including the fact that I saw you as a second chance, a way to honor Michael's memory by giving his brother the opportunities and respect I should have given him, including the fact that your betrayal hurts not because you're destroying my operation, but because I genuinely trusted you as family. The silence stretched between them, years of grief and guilt, and carefully hidden emotion finally surfacing in the cold basement of an abandoned refinery. Cole's gun hand wavered, the weapon lowering fractionally as he processed Grant's admission. You should have told me, Cole said, his voice breaking. You should have told me any of that before I... He gestured at Eliza, at the chains, at the elaborate revenge that had consumed 12 years of his life. Before I turned into the kind of person who kidnaps teenagers to make a point. You're right. I should have. Grant took a careful step forward, his weapon now holstered, his hands visible and empty. But Cole, we can still fix this. Let Eliza go. Turn yourself in. I'll make sure you get a fair hearing, that the full context of Michael's death comes out, that people understand why you did this. It won't erase what happened, but it might give you something other than prison or death as an endpoint. Cole laughed bitterly. You think I'm turning myself in? After 12 years of planning? After finally making you understand what you took from me? He raised his gun again, this time aiming directly at Grant. No. The only way this ends is with you making the same impossible choice I had to make. Either you shoot me to save Eliza, which proves you're still the same cold operator who sacrificed Michael, or you don't shoot me, which means I take Eliza somewhere you'll never find her, and you live with the failure of protecting her. Either way, you finally understand what loss feels like. Grant felt Marcus tense behind Cole, ready to take the shot if Grant gave the signal. But Grant looked at Cole Bishop, the man he'd trusted like a brother, the man whose grief had twisted into 12 years of calculated revenge, and saw not an enemy but a reflection of his own failures. There's a third option, Grant said quietly. You shoot me, right now. End this with my death instead of Eliza's suffering or your own destruction. Michael's death cost you 12 years of grief. Let my death be the price that ends the cycle. Cole's eyes widened. That's not... It's exactly what you want. Justice that feels earned. Revenge that doesn't make you into the monster you're terrified of becoming. And closure that doesn't require destroying an innocent girl's life. Grant took another step forward, now close enough that Cole's gun was almost touching his chest. So do it, Cole. Pull the trigger. Make me pay the price I should have paid 12 years ago. The moment stretched impossibly long, Cole's finger trembling on the trigger, his face twisted with anguish that had nothing to do with hatred and everything to do with the realization that revenge wouldn't actually heal anything. Behind him, Marcus waited for Grant's signal. But Grant stayed absolutely still, giving Cole the choice that Michael had never been offered. Finally, Cole's hand dropped, the gun clattering to the concrete floor as his composure shattered completely. I can't. God help me, Grant. I can't do it. Because killing you won't bring Michael back. And it won't make the last 12 years mean anything except that I wasted them on hate. Grant moved forward and pulled Cole into an embrace that surprised them both, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry about Michael. You're right that I should have acknowledged it. Should have honored his sacrifice. Should have given you the space to grieve instead of expecting you to just move on. I failed you, and I failed him, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Cole collapsed against him. 12 years of suppressed grief finally breaking free in a way that no amount of revenge had been able to trigger. Marcus moved past them to free Eliza, cutting through the chains with bolt cutters he'd been carrying, his expression carefully neutral as he gave the two men space for their reckoning. "What happens now?" Cole asked when he could finally speak again. "Now you face consequences. Legal ones, because kidnapping is a federal crime and my influence only extends so far, but I'll make sure the context comes out, that Michael's story gets told, that people understand why you did this." Grant pulled back, his hands on Cole's shoulders. "And maybe if you're willing, we use this to build something better. A foundation in Michael's name, resources for families of people caught in federal operations, advocacy for prison reform. Turn your grief into something that actually helps people instead of just perpetuating the cycle." Cole's laugh was bitter but not entirely hopeless. "You're really suggesting I turn my revenge plot into a charitable foundation?" "I'm suggesting we both stop using strategy and calculation as excuses for not dealing with grief." Grant glanced at Eliza, who was being checked over by Marcus, traumatized but physically unharmed. "Michael deserved better than to be a line item in a ledger. And you deserve better than spending the rest of your life in prison for a revenge that wouldn't have healed anything anyway." Cole picked up his gun from where it had fallen, and for half a second Grant tensed, wondering if the moment of vulnerability had been a manipulation. But Cole just ejected the magazine and handed both pieces to Grant with a gesture that felt like surrender. "I'll face the consequences. All of them. But Grant," Cole's voice was quiet, "thank you for finally seeing me as something other than an asset to be managed. That's all I ever wanted. Just to be seen." Grant nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He signaled Marcus to call in the cleanup team and secure the scene, then walked over to Eliza Romano, who was shaking despite the blanket Marcus had wrapped around her. "You're safe now," Grant said gently, crouching to her eye level. "Your father asked me to protect you before he left, and I'm sorry I failed, but you're safe now, and Cole's not going to hurt anyone else." Eliza's eyes, dark and intelligent despite her trauma, studied Grant with disturbing perception. "The little girl. The one who drew the picture that brought you here. Is she okay?" Grant blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes, she's safe." "Good." Eliza's voice was hoarse from days of limited water. "Because I heard him Cole talking on the phone about finding her, about making sure she couldn't testify. You need to protect her." Grant's blood went cold. Cole's plot hadn't ended with Eliza's captivity. He'd already set contingencies in motion to eliminate the witness who'd exposed him, which meant June was still in danger, even with Cole in custody. Grant pulled out his phone, dialing Audrey with hands that trembled slightly. The call went to voicemail. He tried Marcus's backup team stationed around the vehicle. No answer. "Marcus!" Grant's voice carried urgency that made his security chief sprint over. "The safe house team isn't responding. Get eyes on June and Audrey now." Marcus was already moving, coordinating with external security, his voice tight with the same fear Grant was feeling. "Boss, the vehicle's empty. Doors are open, engines running, but no sign of June or Audrey." Grant felt the world tilt. He'd been so focused on confronting Cole, on saving Eliza and resolving 12 years of grief, that he'd left June vulnerable. The child who'd trusted him enough to hand over her sketch, who'd provided the evidence that broke the case, who'd been dismissed by every adult except Grant. She was now in the hands of whoever Cole had hired as a contingency. "Find her," Grant said, his voice deadly quiet. "I don't care what resources it takes or what rules we have to break. Find June before Cole's backup eliminates the witness." Cole, still standing nearby with his hands raised in surrender, spoke up. "The man I hired is named Vincent Krause, former military contractor, specializes in cleaning up loose ends. I gave him the vehicle's location and told him to secure the witness if anything went wrong with the Eliza situation." Cole's face had gone pale with horror at what he'd set in motion. "Grant, I swear I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted leverage, insurance that you wouldn't kill me the moment you found Eliza." "Where would Krause take them?" Grant grabbed Cole's jacket, pulling him close. "Where's his base of operations?" "He works out of a storage facility in Queens, industrial district near the rail yards. But Grant Krause thinks June is just a witness who needs to disappear. He doesn't know she's a child. If he realizes..." Grant was already running toward the exit, Marcus at his side, leaving Cole to be secured by the cleanup team. Behind him, he could hear Eliza Romano calling out something about staying safe. But all Grant could think about was June's small face, her desperate trust when she'd handed him that sketch, her steady voice saying, "I sketched the man who stole her." She'd given him the truth, and he'd failed to protect her from the consequences. Now Grant had to get her back before Vincent Krause, a man who specialized in making witnesses disappear, realized that the loose end Cole had hired him to eliminate was an 8-year-old orphan whose only crime was seeing too much and having the courage to speak truth to power. The frantic hunt for Eliza had ended in the sugar refinery's basement, but the hunt for June was just beginning. The drive to Queens took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Grant sat in the passenger seat while Marcus navigated through morning traffic with the kind of aggressive precision that came from years of emergency extractions, running red lights and using the shoulder when necessary. Grant's phone was pressed to his ear, coordinating 3 different teams simultaneously, one tracking Vincent Krause's known locations, one pulling surveillance footage from the refinery's perimeter, and one attempting to triangulate Audrey's phone signal. "Boss, we've got Audrey's phone," one of the tech operatives reported. "Signals pinging from a moving vehicle, heading east on the Long Island Expressway. Looks like they're moving away from the Queens storage facility." Grant's jaw clenched. "That means Krause already has them, and he's relocating. Can you track the vehicle?" "Working on it. Traffic cameras are spotty in that area, but we should have visual confirmation within 5 minutes. Grant disconnected and immediately dialed Cole Bishop, who was now in custody but still cooperative given that he'd just realized his contingency plan had endangered a child. Cole answered on the first ring, his voice tight with guilt. "Grant, I'm sorry, I never meant for... Save it. I need everything you know about Vincent Krause. Where would he take them if he thought the primary location was compromised? What's his protocol for handling witnesses?" Krause has 3 backup locations, one in Queens near the rail yards, one in the Bronx near the industrial waterfront, and one in New Jersey across the river. "But Grant," Cole's voice dropped to something hollow, "Krause's protocol for witnesses is permanent elimination. No trace, no evidence, no loose ends. If he's already moving them, it means he's taking them somewhere remote, where disposal will be easier." Grant felt something cold settle in his chest, not panic, because panic would compromise his operational efficiency, but a focused fury that made his vision sharpen and his thinking crystallize. How long does he typically wait before executing? He likes to verify the situation first, make sure there are no complications that would draw attention. Usually takes 2 to 3 hours between acquisition and Cole couldn't finish the sentence, which means we have maybe 90 minutes before Krause decides June and Audrey are too much risk to keep alive. Grant's hand tightened on his phone. "Cole, I need you to call Krause. Tell him there's been a complication with the Eliza situation, that the witness needs to be held alive for potential negotiation. Buy me time." "He won't believe that. Krause knows my protocols. Once a witness is acquired, elimination is standard procedure. Then convince him otherwise. Tell him the witness has information about a larger operation, that killing her prematurely would compromise other aspects of the plan. I don't care what lie you sell, just keep June and Audrey alive long enough for me to find them." Grant's voice went dangerously quiet. "Because if anything happens to that child, Cole, if Krause hurts her because of your contingency plan, then the grief you felt about Michael won't compare to what I'll make you experience." The line went silent for 3 seconds. Then Cole spoke, his voice steady despite the obvious fear. "I'll make the call. And Grant, I really am sorry. I never wanted children involved in this." "Yeah. Well, they are now. So fix it." Grant disconnected as Marcus pulled up to the Queen's storage facility, a massive complex of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing and minimal security. The place was designed for anonymity, the kind of location where people stored things they didn't want questions asked about. Marcus was already coordinating with the ground team that had arrived ahead of them, former military contractors who operated in the gray space between legal security and private warfare. "Unit 47B is registered to a shell company that traces back to Krause," Marcus reported, studying the facility map on his tablet. "But thermal imaging shows no heat signatures inside. Either he was never here, or he cleared out before we arrived." Grant exited the vehicle and approached the unit, his weapon drawn more from habit than expectation of threat. Marcus breached the padlock with bolt cutters, and they entered to find exactly what Grant had feared, an empty space that had recently been occupied. Tie-down marks on the floor where someone had been restrained. A child's shoe-worn sneaker that matched what June had been wearing. And on the wall, written in what looked like charcoal, a single word in June's distinctive handwriting: "Train." Grant photographed the message and sent it to his entire team. "June's still communicating. She's telling us they're being moved by train or near train tracks. Cross-reference Krause's other locations with rail access. One of the technical operatives responded within 30 seconds. The Bronx location is adjacent to an active freight rail line. If Krause is planning disposal, rail access gives him multiple options for body transport. Grant felt his control fracture for half a second. The clinical language of body transport applied to June, the brave child who'd trusted him before he forced it back into place. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He needed cold, calculating efficiency if he was going to get June back alive. Marcus, get everyone to the Bronx location now. And someone get me Eliza Romano on the phone. Marcus gave him a sharp look. Eliza, why? Because I need to know something. Grant was already moving back to the vehicle, his mind racing through connections he should have made earlier. Get her on the line. Now. 2 minutes later, Grant was speaking to Eliza Romano via speakerphone, the teenage girl's voice still hoarse but steady with the kind of strength that came from surviving captivity. Mr. Holloway? Did you find June? Not yet. But I need you to tell me something, Eliza. When Cole kept you in that basement, did he say anything about why he took you specifically? Did he mention your father, or he said you owed my father a debt? That my father had taught you everything about your business before he betrayed your organization and went into witness protection? Eliza paused. He said taking me was about making you understand what it felt like to fail someone you'd promised to protect. Grant's chest tightened. Did Cole say anything else about your father? About why his protection mattered specifically to me? He said. Eliza's voice wavered slightly. He said my father was the only person you'd ever considered real family. That losing him to witness protection was the closest you'd ever come to grief before Michael Bishop's death. Is that true? Grant closed his eyes, memory surfacing with painful clarity. Antonio Romano had been more than a mentor. He'd been the older brother Grant had never had, the man who'd taught him how to build an empire while maintaining enough humanity that the empire didn't consume him entirely. When Antonio had chosen witness protection over loyalty to the organization, Grant had felt something break in his identity. A fundamental belief that family and business could coexist without eventual betrayal. Yes, Grant said quietly. Your father was family to me. When he left, I lost the only person who understood both sides of who I was, the criminal and the man trying to be something better. And when I promised to protect you, I wasn't just honoring a business obligation. I was trying to maintain the one connection to Antonio that still existed. Then I need to tell you something, Eliza said, her voice gaining strength. When Cole was talking on the phone to someone, probably this Krause person, he mentioned that the witness who exposed him was a child from the foster system. He said the child reminded him of his brother Michael, who'd grown up in institutional care before Grant took him into the organization. Cole said. Eliza's voice broke slightly. He said he couldn't let history repeat itself, couldn't let another kid from the system be used as a strategic asset in Grant's operations. Grant felt the pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. Cole's revenge hadn't been solely about Michael's death. It had been about the entire system that treated vulnerable people as expendable resources. Taking Eliza had been about making Grant feel that loss personally. But threatening June that had been about forcing Grant to confront the hypocrisy of using a traumatized child's evidence while potentially exposing her to the same dangers that had destroyed Michael. Cole wasn't trying to kill June, Grant said, the realization hitting him. He was trying to save her. From me. Marcus looked at Grant like he'd lost his mind. Boss, Krause is a cleaner. His job is elimination. His job is whatever Cole hired him to do. And Cole just realized that June is exactly the kind of vulnerable child he's been trying to protect from operations like mine. Grant's phone was already dialing Cole's number, which means Krause isn't moving June toward disposal. He's moving her toward extraction, getting her out of my reach, so she can't be used as evidence or leverage in whatever criminal proceedings follow Eliza's rescue. Cole answered immediately. Grant, I just spoke to Krause. He's refusing to stand down. He says his contract is to secure the witness and prevent her from being exploited by your organization, and he's following through regardless of my instructions to abort. Where is he taking her? I don't know. Krause operates on compartmentalized information. He doesn't tell me his safe houses or extraction routes specifically, so situations like this can't compromise his operations. Cole's voice was desperate. But Grant, you have to understand Krause isn't going to hurt June. He specializes in witness protection, not assassination. His entire business model is built on keeping vulnerable people alive and hidden from organizations that would exploit them. So he's kidnapping June to protect her? From me? Grant's laugh was bitter. That's rich, considering I'm the one who believed her when every other adult dismissed her as an attention-seeking liar. You believed her because her evidence was useful to you. That's not the same as protecting her from the consequences of that belief. Cole's voice was quiet. Kraus is doing what I should have done from the beginning, removing June from a situation where her value is based entirely on her utility to a criminal operation. Grant wanted to argue, wanted to insist that his protection of June was genuine rather than transactional. But the uncomfortable truth was that he'd brought June into his secure location, used her evidence to track Cole, and exposed her to danger because her drawings served his operational needs. The fact that he'd also felt protective of her, that he genuinely wanted to keep her safe, that didn't erase the fundamental exploitation of a traumatized child's observational skills. Fine, Grant said, his voice hard. Kraus wants to protect June from my operation? I'll prove he's wrong. I'll prove that I can give her actual safety, not just extraction to another unstable situation. He looked at Marcus. Get me everything on Vincent Kraus. His history, his methods, his known associates. If he's moving June through legitimate witness protection channels, there will be a trail. Find it. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in coordinated information warfare. Grant's technical team pulled Kraus's military service records, his contractor history, his banking transactions, and his known safe houses. They built a profile of a man who'd spent 15 years helping witnesses disappear from dangerous situations not through violence, but through meticulous identity reconstruction and strategic relocation. Boss, one of the operatives reported. Kraus has connections to a private foster care network that specializes in placing high-risk children. If he's treating June as a witness who needs protection rather than elimination, he'd likely move her through that system. Grant felt something shift in his chest, not relief exactly, but the recognition that June might actually be safer with Kraus's network than in Grant's secured penthouse, surrounded by armed operatives and the constant threat of criminal reprisal. The realization was devastating because it forced Grant to confront what Audrey and Cole had both been trying to tell him: that protection and exploitation could coexist, and that his genuine care for June didn't erase the fundamental power imbalance of using a child's trauma as operational intelligence. Find that foster network, Grant said quietly. And when you do, I want a meeting with whoever runs it. No threats, no leverage, just a conversation about what June actually needs versus what I've been providing. Marcus studied Grant's face with concern. Boss, you're talking about voluntarily giving up access to our key witness. I'm talking about actually protecting her instead of just using her. Grant's voice was rough. Cole was right about one thing. I've spent my entire career treating people as strategic assets. June deserves better than that, even if better means she's nowhere near my operation. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number with a photo attached. The image showed June and Audrey in what looked like a clean, well-lit room with children's books and comfortable furniture. June was holding her sketch pad, and Audrey had her arm around the child protectively. Beneath the photo, a message. The girl is safe, so is the program coordinator. They'll remain safe, as long as you don't attempt to reclaim them as assets. Consider this witness protection from an organization that actually prioritizes the witness over the operation. VK, Grant stared at the photo, at June's face showing less fear than she'd displayed in his own secure location, and felt something crack in his carefully constructed identity. Vincent Kraus had accomplished in a few hours what Grant had failed to do in 2 days: make June feel genuinely safe rather than strategically valuable. Stand down, Grant told his team, the words costing him. Kraus isn't a threat. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do, protecting a vulnerable child from being used by people like me. Marcus looked at Grant like he'd sustained a head injury. Boss, we can still extract them. We have Kraus's location narrowed to a 3-block radius in the Bronx. 1 tactical team and we'd have June back within the hour. And then what? I proved to her that my protection comes with strings attached. That the moment she's no longer useful as a witness, she goes back to the system that's failed her repeatedly. Grant shook his head. No, we do this differently. He pulled out his phone and typed a response to Kraus's message. I want to meet. No weapons, no backup, just a conversation about what June needs. You're right that I've been treating her as an asset. I want to fix that. Tell me where and when. GH. The response came back within 2 minutes. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. Public location. Bring proof that you can provide stability beyond criminal operations. VK. Grant looked at Marcus, who was watching him with a mixture of confusion and respect. Get me everything we need to establish a legitimate trust fund, educational resources, and permanent housing for June. And contact the best family law attorney in New York. If Kraus is willing to negotiate, I want to prove that I can give June actual stability, not just protection. You're serious about this, Marcus said. Not quite a question. I'm serious about not being the kind of man who uses traumatized children to settle criminal vendettas. Grant's voice was quiet but absolute. June handed me her sketch because she sensed something in me that suggested I'd actually protect her, not just exploit her evidence. I need to prove she was right. For the first time in decades, Grant Holloway was about to do something that had no strategic value to his criminal operation, something that might actually cost him operational capability and legal leverage. He was going to put June's needs above his own. And the terrifying part was that it felt more right than any calculated decision he'd made in his entire career. The meeting location Kraus had chosen was deliberately public, a cafe in Brooklyn's Prospect Heights neighborhood, surrounded by young families and weekend brunchers who provided natural security through sheer witness density. Grant arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his usual tailored suits, carrying a leather portfolio that contained everything Kraus had demanded: trust fund documentation, educational planning resources, and signed affidavits from a family law attorney confirming Grant's intention to establish legal guardianship. Vincent Kraus was already there, sitting at a corner table with sightlines to all entrances and his back protected by a solid wall. He was exactly what Grant expected from a former military contractor, late 40s, weathered face that had seen combat, and the kind of controlled stillness that came from years of high-risk operations. Audrey Dora sat beside him, looking exhausted but unharmed, her protective instincts clearly still on high alert. June was drawing at a separate table a few feet away, her sketch pad balanced on her knees, her dark eyes tracking Grant's approach with careful assessment. Grant moved slowly, his hands visible and empty, and settled into the chair Kraus indicated. He didn't speak first. That was Kraus's territory, his meeting, his rules. "Mr. Holloway," Kraus said, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd learned to keep emotions separate from operations. "You brought the documentation I requested?" Grant slid the portfolio across the table. "Everything you asked for. Trust fund with $5 million initial funding, managed by independent trustees with zero connection to my operations. Educational planning that includes private school tuition through high school and full college funding. And a commitment to establish permanent housing under my legal guardianship, with Audrey Dora serving as primary day-to-day caretaker if she's willing to accept that role." Audrey's eyes widened. "You're offering me? What exactly are you offering me?" "A job," Grant said simply. "As June's guardian and advocate, employed through a legitimate nonprofit I'm establishing specifically for children who've been failed by the foster system. Competitive salary, benefits, and complete autonomy to make decisions about June's care without interference from my criminal operations. You'd have legal protection, financial security, and the authority to remove June from my access entirely if you ever felt she was at risk." Kraus reviewed the documents with the meticulous attention of someone who'd built a career on identifying deception. After 5 minutes of silent reading, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "This is legitimate. No hidden clauses, no conditions that tie June's care to your operational needs." Kraus's eyes narrowed. "What changed? 24 hours ago, you were using a traumatized child's evidence to hunt down your betrayer. Now you're establishing trust funds and advocating for her independence? What changed is that Cole Bishop and you both forced me to confront what I've become." Grant's voice was quiet but steady. "I've spent 30 years treating people as strategic assets, calculating their value based on utility rather than humanity. And when June handed me that sketch, I did exactly what I've always done. I used her evidence for my operational needs while telling myself that protection and exploitation weren't the same thing. But they are the same thing when the protection is conditional on continued utility." Grant glanced at June, who'd stopped drawing and was watching him with those dark, too perceptive eyes. "June deserves better than to be another Michael Bishop, another vulnerable kid used by my organization until the cost becomes too high. So yes, I'm establishing legitimate resources for her care. And yes, I'm giving Audrey complete authority to manage that care without my interference, because the alternative is proving Cole and you right about who I really am." Audrey leaned forward, her voice sharp with the protective anger she'd been containing. "And what happens when June's evidence is needed for Cole Bishop's prosecution? When the district attorney subpoenas her testimony and she has to relive the trauma of watching Eliza's abduction? Are you still committed to her independence then? Or does your support evaporate the moment she's no longer cooperating with your agenda?" "That's why the trust is managed by independent trustees," Grant said, meeting Audrey's challenging gaze directly. "June's financial security isn't contingent on her testimony or cooperation with any legal proceedings. If she chooses never to speak about what she witnessed, the trust remains fully funded. If she chooses to testify, the trust remains fully funded. Her stability is permanent regardless of her utility to my operations or anyone else's legal agenda. Kraus set down the documents and leaned back, his expression calculating. You understand that what you're proposing is legally binding? That once these trusts are established, and Audrey is appointed as guardian, you lose operational control over June entirely. She becomes a protected minor whose welfare is managed by someone who has zero loyalty to your organization. That's exactly the point. Grant's jaw tightened. I need to prove to June, to Audrey, to myself that I'm capable of protecting someone without exploiting them, that I can value a human being beyond their strategic utility. If that means giving up control, then that's the price I should have been paying all along. June stood up from her table and walked over with her sketch pad, her small frame radiating determination despite the obvious nervousness in her hands. She opened to a fresh page where she'd drawn 2 portraits side by side. Grant Holloway and Cole Bishop. Both men were rendered with June's characteristic accuracy, but the expressions she'd captured were revealing. Grant looked conflicted, his face showing the internal war between protection and control. Cole looked broken, his features carrying grief that had twisted into something destructive. Beneath the portraits, June had written in careful letters, both hurt, both trying, both need family, not revenge. Grant stared at the drawing, at June's intuitive understanding that he and Cole were mirror images, both men who'd turned grief and loss into operational control, both men who'd failed to process trauma in healthy ways, both men who'd built empires to avoid feeling vulnerable. The comparison was devastating and accurate in equal measure. You're right, Grant said quietly, speaking directly to June for the first time since entering the cafe. I've been trying to control everything because feeling things seemed like weakness, but that just made me into someone who hurt people without meaning to. Someone like Cole, who let grief turn into revenge instead of healing. June studied him for a long moment, then flipped to another page where she'd drawn what looked like a family portrait. Herself, Audrey, and surprisingly, Grant. They were sitting together in what looked like a comfortable living room, June in the middle with her sketch pad, Audrey and Grant on either side. The image radiated safety rather than strategy, connection rather than utility. Beneath it, June had written, "This is what family looks like. Not assets, not operations, just people who choose each other." Grant felt something crack completely in his chest, the final defense mechanism he'd built to protect himself from emotional vulnerability. Because June was right. Real family wasn't about strategic alliances or calculated protections. It was about choosing to show up for people even when there was no operational benefit, even when vulnerability felt terrifying, even when control had to be surrendered to genuine trust. I want that too, Grant said, his voice rough with emotion he'd spent decades suppressing. But June, I need you to understand something. The world I operate in is dangerous. People like Cole exist, people who will use anyone connected to me as leverage or revenge. If you become part of my family, you inherit those risks. And I need to know that you understand what you'd be choosing. June's charcoal moved across a fresh page, her hand steady despite the weight of what she was drawing. This time, she sketched Grant's face in the moment he'd taken her sketch pad at the museum, the instant his composure had shattered upon seeing Cole's portrait. Beneath it, June wrote, "You broke when you saw truth. That means you still feel. That means you can heal." She's right, Audrey said quietly, her protective anger softening into something more complex. You did break, Mr. Holloway. I watched it happen. And that breaking, that's the only reason I'm sitting here considering your proposal, instead of taking June straight to Child Protective Services and never looking back. Kraus was watching the exchange with professional assessment, but Grant could see the calculation shifting. The contractor had been hired to protect June from exploitation, but he was also witnessing something rarer. Genuine transformation born from confronting uncomfortable truths rather than deflecting them. I have terms, Kraus said finally. If I'm going to approve this arrangement, and yes, June's safety requires my approval before I release her from protective custody, then I need guarantees beyond legal documents. Name them, Grant said. First, Audrey has complete veto power over June's involvement in any legal proceedings, testimony, or exposure related to your operations. If the district attorney requests June's cooperation, Audrey decides whether that's in June's best interest, not you, not the legal system, not anyone else. Agreed. Second, June receives ongoing trauma counseling from a therapist with zero connection to your organization, someone I vet personally, Someone whose loyalty is to June's healing rather than your operational needs. Agreed. Third, you submit to regular check-ins with me personally. Monthly meetings where I assess whether June's living situation remains stable and non-exploitative. The moment I determine you've reverted to treating her as an asset, I extract her immediately, and your legal access terminates permanently. Grant felt the weight of that condition, the permanent surrender of control, the acceptance that his protection of June would be monitored and held accountable by someone with zero investment in his criminal empire. It should have felt threatening. Instead, it felt like relief. Agreed, Grant said. Anything else? Yes. Kraus leaned forward, his voice dropping to something colder. Cole Bishop's contingency plan didn't end with me. He hired a secondary contractor, someone less principled than me, to handle permanent solutions if the primary extraction failed. That contractor is named Felix Navarro, and he's currently under the impression that June remains a high-value target who needs elimination. Grant's blood went cold. When was Navarro activated? Approximately 2 hours ago, when Cole realized his phone conversations with me were being monitored by your technical team. He triggered a failsafe that sent Navarro June's description, known locations, and a fee structure that incentivizes fast resolution. Kraus's expression was grim. Navarro specializes in making witnesses disappear permanently. He doesn't extract and protect like I do, he eliminates and disposes. And he's very, very good at his job. How long do we have? Grant was already pulling out his phone, signaling Marcus to mobilize security teams. Navarro typically moves within 6 to 12 hours of activation, which means if he's efficient, he could hit this location within the next 4 hours. Kraus gestured to the cafe full of civilians. We need to move June somewhere with better security than a public brunch spot. Grant looked at Audrey, who'd gone pale but was already gathering June's belongings with practiced efficiency. The safe house in Tribeca. It's the most secure location I have, and Navarro won't know about it unless Cole specifically gave him the address. Cole didn't give him the address, Kraus confirmed. But Navarro has resources. If he's motivated by the fee structure Cole established and it's substantial, he'll find June eventually. This isn't a problem that goes away with better security. This is a problem that requires eliminating the threat. Then we eliminate Felix Navarro before he gets anywhere near June. Grant's voice carried the cold certainty that had defined his operational career. Marcus, I need full intelligence on Navarro within the hour. Known locations, active contracts, vulnerabilities we can exploit, and I need a tactical team ready to neutralize him the moment we have his position. June grabbed Grant's sleeve, her small hand surprisingly strong. She held up her sketchpad, where she'd been drawing throughout the conversation. The new image showed a man's face, sharp features, calculating eyes, the kind of predatory awareness that marked professional killers. Beneath the portrait, June had written, "Saw him at museum, was watching me." This is the threat. Grant stared at the sketch, at June's photographic observation, capturing details she'd probably stored subconsciously during the chaos at the museum. You saw Navarro there? Before any of this started? June nodded, flipping to another page where she'd drawn a wider scene. The museum gala, with various figures positioned throughout. Grant recognized himself, Cole, Eliza, Audrey, and there, in the background near an exit, the same predatory figure from her latest portrait. Felix Navarro had been surveilling the situation from the beginning, probably as insurance in case Cole's primary plan went sideways. He was watching you even then, Grant said, the pieces clicking into place. Cole's contingency wasn't just about eliminating a witness after the fact. It was about having backup in place from the moment you handed me that first sketch. Which means Navarro has been tracking June's movements for over 48 hours, Kraus said, his professional assessment sharpening into concern. He knows her patterns, her known locations, probably even which safe houses you've used. This cafe was public enough that he couldn't strike immediately, but the moment we move to a secured location, he'll hit during the transition, Grant finished. When June's vulnerable in transit between public exposure and secured protection. Exactly. Kraus was already scanning the cafe's exits and approaches. We need to assume Navarro has eyes on this location right now, which means our extraction needs to account for active surveillance and probable ambush along any route we take. Grant felt the familiar calculation kick in the operational efficiency he'd spent decades perfecting, now applied to protecting someone who actually mattered beyond strategic value. We run a decoy operation. Multiple vehicles leaving simultaneously from different exits, only one containing June. Navarro can't hit all of them, so he'll have to choose based on probability and observation. He'll choose correctly, Kraus said flatly. Navarro's been doing this for 15 years. He'll identify which vehicle has the primary target within the first 30 seconds of observation. Then we make sure he identifies wrong. Grant looked at Audrey, assessing her frame and coloring. You're close enough in build and height to June if we account for distance and quick observation. We put you in a vehicle with security detail that looks like primary protection. Make it obvious that's the high-value target. Meanwhile, June leaves in a completely different vehicle with minimal security signature, something that looks like random civilian traffic rather than tactical extraction. Audrey's eyes widened. You want me to be bait? I want you to be a decoy that saves June's life. Navarro won't shoot immediately. He'll follow the high-value vehicle to a better ambush point, somewhere with lower witness density and better escape routes. That gives my team time to intercept him before he realizes he's tracking the wrong target. And if he realizes during the follow, if he identifies that I'm not June and redirects to the actual target? Audrey's voice carried fear but also determination. Then my backup team, the one shadowing June's actual vehicle, handles him before he gets within 100 yards. Grant's voice was absolute. Audrey, I won't ask you to take this risk if you're not comfortable. But if you're willing, it's our best chance of moving June safely without triggering an immediate attack. Audrey looked at June, who was watching the adult conversation with the hyper-aware stillness of someone who'd learned to track danger through verbal patterns and body language shifts. The program coordinator's expression softened into something fiercely protective. I'll do it, Audrey said. But Mr. Holloway, if anything happens to June because your plan failed, I will make sure every law enforcement agency in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are and what your operations involve. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Grant respected her completely in that moment, the way she balanced pragmatic cooperation with absolute unwillingness to compromise on June's safety. Kraus, you comfortable with this extraction plan? The contractor was already running calculations, his professional assessment weighing risks against alternatives. It's sound tactically, but it requires perfect timing and zero errors in execution. One miscommunication and either June or Audrey ends up exposed to a professional killer. Then we don't miscommunicate. Grant was already coordinating with Marcus via text, establishing vehicle positions and team assignments. We have 20 minutes to set this up. Let's move. The next 18 minutes were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Grant's team positioned 3 identical black SUVs at different exits around the cafe's perimeter. Audrey was fitted with a jacket and hat, similar to what June had been wearing, creating enough visual similarity that quick observation would suggest primary target identification. June was moved to a completely different vehicle, a civilian sedan driven by one of Grant's most trusted operatives, someone who looked like a suburban parent doing weekend errands, rather than a tactical extraction specialist. Kraus rode with June, his presence providing both protection and strategic oversight. Grant positioned himself with Audrey in the decoy vehicle, his decision calculated to ensure Navarro would identify that SUV as the primary target, because what assassin wouldn't assume the crime boss would personally protect his most valuable witness? All teams, status check. Marcus coordinated via encrypted comms. Decoy vehicle Alpha, ready for departure. Primary package vehicle Bravo, ready for departure. Shadow vehicle Charlie, ready for mobile surveillance. Grant looked at Audrey, who was gripping the door handle with white knuckles, but whose expression remained determined. You ready for this? No. But June needs me to be. So I will be. Audrey's voice was steady despite the fear. Just don't get me killed proving you're better than Cole Bishop. That's exactly what I'm trying not to do. Grant signaled Marcus to initiate the extraction sequence. All vehicles, move on my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute. All 3 vehicles pulled away from their positions simultaneously, creating exactly the kind of confusion that would force Navarro to make fast target identification. Grant watched the mirrors and side streets, looking for the telltale signs of a professional tale. Vehicles that moved too smoothly through traffic. Drivers whose attention stayed locked on specific targets rather than general road awareness. The subtle positioning that allowed quick strike capability while maintaining plausible deniability. Boss, I've got eyes on a possible tail, Marcus reported from the shadow vehicle. Gray sedan, 2 car lengths behind the decoy vehicle, driver matching Navarro's description from June's sketch. Grant felt satisfaction and dread in equal measure. The plan was working. Navarro had identified the decoy vehicle as the primary target, which meant Audrey was now being actively hunted by a professional killer. Shadow team, maintain loose tail on Navarro. Let him think he's undetected, but be ready to intercept the moment he makes aggressive movement. Grant kept his voice calm despite the adrenaline. Primary package vehicle. Take evasive route to the safe house. Assume you're clean but maintain tactical awareness. Copy that, boss, came Krause's voice from June's vehicle. Package is secure and calm. She's drawing. Of course she was drawing. Grant felt a flash of affection for June's unshakable focus, even in the middle of a tactical extraction with an assassin hunting her. The child was documenting the experience through art. The gray sedan stayed locked on Grant's vehicle for 6 blocks, maintaining professional distance while clearly tracking their movement. Then, as they approached a construction zone with minimal traffic and high noise cover, Navarro made his move. The sedan accelerated suddenly, pulling alongside the decoy vehicle in a maneuver designed to create either collision or forced stop. Grant saw the driver's window lowering, saw the distinctive shape of a suppressed pistol emerging, saw everything happening with the crystalline clarity that came from decades of surviving similar situations. "Contact!" Grant shouted into comms while simultaneously yanking the steering wheel hard right, forcing the SUV into a defensive swerve that threw off Navarro's shooting angle. The suppressed shots hit the reinforced door panel instead of the windows. 3 quick impacts that sounded like someone punching metal rather than lethal force attempting murder. "Shadow Team, engage now!" Marcus's voice carried controlled urgency as the backup vehicle accelerated from its trailing position, cutting off Navarro's escape route and forcing him into a tactical box where his options narrowed to surrender or escalation. Navarro chose escalation. The gray sedan's driver threw the vehicle into reverse with professional precision, attempting to break the tactical box through aggressive countermaneuver. But Marcus's team had been preparing for exactly this response. A second shadow vehicle appeared from a side street, completing the containment and leaving Navarro with 0 escape options. The assassin's sedan slammed to a stop, and for 3 seconds, Grant thought Navarro might actually surrender. Then the driver's door opened and Navarro emerged with his weapon raised, clearly intending to fight his way out rather than accept capture. Marcus's team responded with overwhelming force, not lethal shots, because Grant needed Navarro alive for interrogation, but precision targeting that disabled the assassin's shooting hand and dropped him to the pavement before he could fire. "Target neutralized," Marcus reported. "Navarro is in custody, wounded but stable. Medic team is securing him now." Grant felt something unclench in his chest. He looked at Audrey, who was breathing hard but unharmed, her eyes wide with the shock of having just survived a professional assassination attempt. "You okay?" Grant asked. "I'm absolutely not okay," Audrey said, her voice shaking. "But I'm alive, which means June is safe. So I guess that's okay enough." Grant coordinated the cleanup Marcus's team would handle Navarro's interrogation and ensure he couldn't communicate with whatever network Cole had established. The decoy vehicle would be sanitized and disappeared, and most importantly, June's actual transport had reached the safe house without incident, meaning the child was now behind reinforced security with Krause standing guard. By the time Grant and Audrey arrived at the safe house an hour later, June was sitting in the main room with her sketchpad, surrounded by drawings she'd created during the extraction. The child looked up when they entered, her dark eyes assessing them for injury or distress before relaxing slightly. "We're okay," Grant said before June could ask. "The man who was trying to hurt you has been stopped. You're safe now." June flipped to a page where she'd drawn the extraction sequence vehicles moving in coordinated patterns, the gray sedan pursuing, the sudden violence of the confrontation. At the bottom she'd written, "Audrey brave. Grant kept promise. Krause was right to trust." "I'm not sure brave is the word for what I just did," Audrey said, her laugh slightly hysterical. "Terrified but willing, maybe. Insane and protective, definitely." June crossed the room and wrapped her small arms around Audrey's waist, the gesture speaking what words apparently couldn't. Audrey returned the embrace with fierce protectiveness, her eyes filling with tears she'd been holding back throughout the entire tactical operation. Grant watched them, feeling simultaneously grateful for Audrey's courage and devastated by the recognition that he'd put both of them at risk by failing to anticipate Cole's full contingency planning. Krause moved to stand beside him, his professional assessment softening into something almost approving. "You did well," Krause said quietly, both tactically and emotionally. "Most men in your position would have prioritized operational control over civilian safety. You did the opposite. I almost got Audrey killed. You saved June by being willing to use yourself and Audrey as tactical assets, but only after ensuring Audrey had complete informed consent and multiple layers of protective backup." Krause's voice was a matter of fact. "That's the difference between exploitation and partnership. You gave Audrey agency while accepting risk yourself. That's what makes this protection rather than manipulation." Grant wasn't sure he deserved the praise, but he accepted it with a nod. What happens with Navarro? My people will handle his interrogation. By tomorrow morning, we'll have a complete picture of Cole's contingency network and any remaining threats that need neutralization. Krause paused. And for what it's worth, Cole Bishop just proved that even broken people trying to do the right thing can make catastrophically bad decisions. The fact that you're willing to learn from that rather than repeat it, that's actual growth. Grant looked at June, at the child who'd survived institutional neglect, who'd witnessed an abduction and been dismissed by every adult she'd tried to tell, who'd finally found the courage to approach him at the museum with evidence that shattered his entire world. She was drawing again, her charcoal moving across paper with the focused intensity that defined her existence. This time, June was sketching a portrait of Audrey, not the scared woman who'd just survived an assassination attempt, but the fierce protector who'd chosen courage over safety because a child needed her. Beneath the portrait, June had written in careful letters, "Family isn't blood. It's choosing to show up when afraid." Grant read the words and felt the truth of them settle into his bones. He'd spent 30 years building an empire based on strategic calculations and controlled relationships. But watching June and Audrey, watching real connection forged through shared vulnerability rather than transactional utility, he finally understood what he'd been missing. Family wasn't about power or protection or tactical advantage. It was about showing up when you were terrified, surrendering control when someone needed autonomy, and choosing people over operations, even when the strategic cost was devastating. Grant Holloway was finally learning what it meant to be human, rather than just powerful, and it was the most terrifying transformation he'd ever experienced. Felix Navarro's interrogation lasted 6 hours, and yielded exactly what Grant needed: the full architecture of Cole Bishop's contingency network, including 2 additional contractors who'd been activated as failsafes in case Navarro's operation failed. Marcus's team was already moving to neutralize those threats, coordinating with Krause's people to ensure every potential danger to June was identified and eliminated before they could act. But the interrogation also revealed something Grant hadn't anticipated. Cole Bishop had one final play in motion, something he'd set up years ago as insurance against complete organizational collapse: a safe deposit box in a bank in Jersey City, containing evidence that would implicate not just Grant but his entire upper command structure in a decade's worth of criminal operations. The box was set to auto-release to federal prosecutors if Cole didn't check in every 72 hours with a specific code. "It's a dead man's switch," Marcus explained, reviewing the intelligence they'd extracted from Navarro. "Cole established it back when he first infiltrated your organization, probably as protection in case you ever discovered his real identity or intentions. The last check-in was 48 hours ago, which means we have less than 24 hours before the box automatically opens and sends everything to the FBI." Grant sat in his office at the safe house, the weight of Cole's final betrayal settling onto shoulders that were already carrying more guilt than he'd thought possible. "Can we access the box? Intercept the release before it triggers?" Not without Cole's access codes and biometric verification. He designed the system specifically to prevent exactly this kind of intervention. Marcus hesitated. "Boss, there's one other option. We could ask Cole to reset the timer, buy us time to negotiate terms, or find a way to neutralize the evidence before it goes public. Cole's in federal custody. Why would he help us? Because the evidence in that box doesn't just implicate you. It implicates him too. All the operations he ran. All the decisions he made while working as your lieutenant. If that box opens, Cole goes down with you. And given that he's already facing kidnapping charges for taking Eliza, adding RICO conspiracy to his legal problems means he's looking at life without parole instead of potentially negotiated sentencing." Grant considered the calculation. Cole had built his entire revenge around making Grant feel loss and betrayal, but he'd also left himself a path to leverage if the revenge went too far. The safe deposit box was insurance for Cole as much as it was threat to Grant, which meant Cole might be willing to negotiate if the alternative was mutual destruction. "Set up a meeting," Grant said. "Cole and me, face to face, with federal supervision if necessary. I'll convince him to reset the timer. And if he refuses, then we all go down together. And I accept that as the natural consequence of 30 years of strategic exploitation." Grant's voice was quiet but absolute. "I'm done running from accountability, Marcus. If Cole's evidence is accurate, then maybe it's time I faced what I've built." The meeting was arranged for that evening at the Federal Detention Center where Cole was being held pending arraignment. Grant arrived alone, having left June's security to Krause and Audrey, and was escorted to a private consultation room where Cole Bishop sat in prison orange, his hands cuffed to the table, his expression carrying exhaustion rather than satisfaction. "You look like hell," Cole said without preamble. "I'm guessing Navarro didn't succeed in eliminating your witness problem. June is safe, Navarro's in custody, and your entire contingency network has been dismantled." Grant settled into the chair across from Cole, maintaining eye contact. "So congratulations, your revenge plot destroyed exactly one person's life. Yours." Cole's laugh was bitter. "That's rich, coming from the man whose entire empire is built on destroyed lives. How many people have you sacrificed over the years, Grant? How many Michael Bishops did it take to build Blackwood Holdings? More than I can count. And I'm not here to defend my history or justify the choices I made." Grant leaned forward, his voice dropping to something raw. "I'm here because your dead man's switch is set to destroy both of us in less than 24 hours, and I need to know if you're actually committed to mutual destruction, or if there's still enough of the man I trusted to find a different ending." Cole studied Grant's face with disturbing intensity. "You came here to negotiate? I came here to tell you the truth." Grant's hands were steady despite the internal devastation. "That safe deposit box contains evidence that will dismantle everything I've built, send me to prison for the rest of my life, and destroy the few legitimate aspects of my operations that actually help people. And you know what? I'll accept that if it's the price for accountability. But Cole, that evidence also destroys you. Destroys the memory of Michael because it'll come out that his death was part of larger criminal conspiracy, and destroys any chance of the foundation I was planning to build in Michael's name ever becoming reality." "What foundation?" "Resources for families affected by criminal justice system failures. Advocacy for reform. Support for people who got caught in the same machinery that killed Michael." Grant's voice was quiet. "I know it doesn't bring him back. I know it doesn't erase what I did. But it's the only way I know to honor his memory beyond letting guilt consume me the way it consumed you." Cole's expression flickered, something vulnerable breaking through years of carefully constructed revenge. "You were really going to build that? A foundation for people like Michael?" "I've already started the paperwork. Legal team is establishing the nonprofit structure. Seed funding is committed. And Audrey Dora has agreed to serve on the advisory board to ensure it actually serves families rather than just functioning as PR for my operations." Grant met Cole's eyes directly. "But none of that happens if your dead man's switch triggers. The evidence in that box will freeze all my assets, shut down every operation I run, and ensure that the foundation never gets beyond initial planning." "Good," Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's exactly what should happen to men like us." "Maybe. But Cole, it's not just us who pay the price. It's June, who loses the stability I was trying to provide. It's Audrey, who loses the resources to help other kids like June. It's Eliza Romano, who loses the protection that's keeping her safe while her father's in witness protection. And it's Michael's memory, because instead of being honored through meaningful advocacy, he becomes another footnote in a federal case about criminal conspiracy." Cole was silent for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly against the table's surface. "You're asking me to let you go free? After everything? I'm asking you to reset the timer so we both have time to figure out what accountability actually looks like. Not mutual destruction that serves no one, but genuine consequences that create something better than what came before." Grant's voice was steady despite the emotional weight. "I'll plead guilty to whatever charges the evidence supports. I'll cooperate with federal prosecutors. I'll dismantle the criminal aspects of my operations and accept whatever prison sentence comes from that. But I need time to establish the foundation first, to ensure June's trust fund is protected from asset forfeiture, to make sure the legitimate good I can still do actually happens before I disappear into the federal system. Why should I believe you'll actually follow through? The moment that timer resets, you could disappear, liquidate assets, destroy evidence. Because June is watching what I do next," Grant interrupted. "And I promised her that I'm capable of being more than just a strategic operator, that I can actually value people over operations, that I can face consequences without running, that I can be the kind of man who deserves her trust." Grant's voice went quiet. "I can't prove that to her if your evidence destroys everything before I have the chance to make it right." Cole stared at Grant for what felt like an eternity. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Michael would have liked that foundation. He always said the system was broken, that people like us only existed because legitimate paths to stability were blocked by institutional failures. He was right about that. So if I reset the timer, if I give you time to build what you're promising, you'll actually accept federal prosecution? You'll actually cooperate instead of using your resources to evade consequences?" "Yes," Grant said simply. "I'll face what I've done. All of it." Cole closed his eyes. And Grant could see the war happening behind his expression, 12 years of revenge, versus the recognition that revenge hadn't healed anything, just perpetuated the same cycle of destruction that killed Michael in the first place. "The access codes are in my personal effects," Cole said finally. "Safe deposit box key is there too. You'll need my biometric signature to access the box itself, which means I need to authorize you as temporary representative. You're willing to do that? I'm willing to give you 60 days to prove you're not lying about accepting consequences. 60 days to establish that foundation, secure June's future, and prepare for federal prosecution." "But Grant," Cole's eyes opened, hard and absolutely serious. "If you run, if you try to evade or destroy evidence or use your resources to avoid accountability, I'll make sure every piece of information in that box gets released with additional context that ensures you never see daylight again. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear." Grant felt something unclench in his chest, not relief exactly, but the recognition that he'd been given a chance to actually make things right, rather than just minimize damage. They spent the next hour coordinating the technicalities. Cole provided the access information to his federal attorney, who would work with Grant's legal team to establish temporary access to the safe deposit box. The timer would be reset for 60 days, during which Grant would have to demonstrate genuine commitment to the promises he'd made. Cole would cooperate with prosecutors regarding the Eliza kidnapping in exchange for consideration of his motivations and mental state during the crime. As Grant prepared to leave, Cole spoke one more time, his voice carrying something that might have been hope beneath the exhaustion. "The foundation. When you establish it, when you build something that actually honors Michael instead of just exploiting his memory for PR, will you tell people the truth? That he wasn't just a casualty of criminal operations, but a human being who deserved better?" "I'll tell them everything," Grant promised. "The choices I made, the cost to people like Michael, the systemic failures that made those choices seem necessary. All of it. Then maybe," Cole's voice broke slightly, "maybe some good comes from this nightmare after all." Grant left the detention center with Cole's access information and the crushing weight of 60 days to transform himself from criminal operator into someone capable of genuine accountability. The first call he made was to June, via Krause's encrypted phone, to explain what had happened and what came next. "June, I need to tell you something," Grant said when the child answered with her characteristic silence. "The man who betrayed me, Cole Bishop, he set up insurance that could destroy everything I've built. But he's giving me 60 days to prove I'm serious about changing, about building something better than the empire I've been running. That means 60 days to make sure you're completely protected, to establish resources that help people instead of exploiting them, and to prepare for the legal consequences that I've been avoiding for 30 years. There was a pause, then June's voice came through, quiet but steady. "Will you go to prison?" "Probably yes. For a long time." "Who will protect me then?" Grant felt the question hit like a physical blow. "Audrey will be your primary guardian. The trust fund will provide financial security, and Krause will continue monitoring to ensure you're safe. But June, I won't be around to help the way I've been trying to." Another pause, longer this time. Then June spoke again, her voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "You help me most by doing the right thing, not by staying free and powerful, by accepting consequences and building something good." "You're sure about that?" "I sketched the truth because truth matters more than power. You taught me that by believing me when no one else did. Now you have to live it by telling truth about yourself, even when it costs everything." Grant closed his eyes, feeling the child's moral clarity cut through decades of strategic rationalization. "You're braver than I am, June." "No. I just learned from watching what happens when people choose revenge over healing. Cole chose revenge. You're choosing healing. That's the difference." They talked for a few more minutes, Grant explaining the foundation he was building, the resources that would exist beyond his personal freedom, the way Audrey and Krause would ensure June's stability, regardless of what happened to him. By the time the call ended, Grant felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Genuine hope that his life might actually matter for something beyond accumulated power. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal coordination and strategic dismantling. Grant worked with federal prosecutors to outline the scope of his cooperation, providing evidence that would dismantle the criminal aspects of his operations, while protecting the people who'd been caught up in them unintentionally. He established the Michael Bishop Foundation with initial funding of $50 million, appointed an independent board of directors with zero connection to his operations, and ensured Audrey Dora had both the resources and authority to actually help families affected by criminal justice failures. He transferred majority control of his legitimate business holdings to a trust that would benefit June and other children who'd been failed by the foster system. He arranged for key employees who'd been involved in legal operations to receive severance packages and recommendation letters that would help them find employment elsewhere. And he began the painful process of identifying everyone who'd been harmed by his decisions over 30 years, creating a compensation fund that would provide some measure of accountability even if it couldn't erase the damage. On the third day, Grant returned to the safe house where June had been staying, this time with Audrey and Krause present for the conversation he needed to have face to face. June was drawing when he arrived, always drawing, but she looked up with those dark, perceptive eyes and seemed to understand immediately that something had shifted. "It's time," June said simply. "Almost," Grant replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I have about 57 days left before I turn myself in for prosecution, but I wanted to talk to you about what happens during those days and what happens after." June set down her charcoal and gave him her complete attention. "I'm going to use the time I have to finish establishing everything I promised the Foundation. Your trust, resources for people who need them, and I'm going to prepare for what comes next, which is probably 15 to 20 years in federal prison for the crimes I've committed." Grant's voice was steady despite the emotional weight. "But June, I need you to understand something. Going to prison isn't me abandoning you. It's me finally being the kind of man who deserves the trust you showed me at the museum." "I know," June said quietly. "People who run from consequences can't protect anyone. They're too busy protecting themselves." "Exactly." Grant felt something warm in his chest despite the devastation of what he was describing. "So during the time I have left, I want to make sure you understand everything that's been set up for your protection and care. Audrey is officially your guardian. Krause will monitor your situation monthly to ensure you're safe and stable. The trust fund will provide for your needs through college and beyond. And the Foundation will exist to help other kids like you who've been dismissed and ignored by systems that should protect them." June flipped to a page in her sketch pad, where she'd been drawing throughout Grant's explanation. The image showed a man walking toward a building that was clearly a prison, but his face carried peace rather than fear. Behind him, a child was drawing, surrounded by books and art supplies, safe and protected. And in the background, other children were receiving help from adults who actually listened to them. Beneath the image, June had written, "Consequences and healing both happen. Both matter." Grant stared at the drawing, at June's intuitive understanding that justice and compassion could coexist, that accepting punishment and creating positive change weren't mutually exclusive. "That's beautiful, June." "It's what you're doing," June said simply. "Accepting consequences while building something good. That's harder than just revenge or just running away. It's the brave thing." Audrey, who'd been watching silently, finally spoke up, her voice rough with emotion. "You're really doing this. You're actually going to dismantle your empire and accept prison time rather than using your resources to evade consequences." "I am," Grant confirmed, "because the alternative is proving June wrong about me, and I won't do that to her." The next 57 days were the most productive and emotionally exhausting of Grant's life. He worked 16-hour days establishing systems that would outlast his freedom, ensuring every promise he'd made was fulfilled before federal prosecution began. The Michael Bishop Foundation launched publicly with a mission statement that acknowledged the systemic failures Grant had both experienced and perpetuated. June's trust fund was protected from asset forfeiture through legal structures that even federal prosecutors acknowledged were legitimate. And Grant coordinated with law enforcement to provide evidence that would dismantle criminal operations while minimizing harm to people who'd been coerced or manipulated into participation. Cole Bishop, watching from federal detention, reset the timer twice more, first at 30 days, then at 15 days each time, acknowledging that Grant was actually following through on his promises rather than using the time to evade consequences. On the final day before Grant's voluntary surrender to federal authorities, he returned to the safe house one last time to say goodbye to June. The child was waiting with a final portrait she'd created over the past 8 weeks. Grant Holloway at the museum gala, the moment June had handed him the sketch that changed everything. But this time, June had added something new to the image she'd drawn: light, breaking through darkness behind Grant's figure, suggesting transformation rather than just destruction. Beneath the portrait, June had written, "The man who saw truth and chose to become worthy of it. That's who you are now," June said, handing Grant the drawing. "Not the man who made mistakes. Not the man who sacrificed people. The man who saw truth and became worthy of it." Grant accepted the portrait with hands that trembled despite his attempts at control. "I don't know if I'll ever be worthy, June, but I'm grateful you gave me the chance to try." "You're already worthy," June said with absolute certainty, "because you chose healing over revenge. That's the hardest thing, That's the thing Cole couldn't do until you showed him how. They sat together for another hour, Grant explaining what would happen during his imprisonment, how Audrey and Krause would care for June, how the Foundation would continue operating regardless of his legal status. June listened with her characteristic intensity, occasionally adding observations or drawings that captured aspects of the conversation Grant hadn't fully articulated. Finally, when it was time for Grant to leave for his voluntary surrender, June stood and wrapped her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug that said more than words could convey. "Thank you for believing me," June whispered against his jacket. "Thank you for being the first adult who actually listened." "Thank you for giving me something worth becoming," Grant replied, his voice rough with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. "You saved my life, June. Not by providing evidence, but by showing me what actual courage looks like." Grant left the safe house and drove to federal court, where prosecutors were waiting to process his voluntary surrender and begin the proceedings that would define the rest of his life. Cole Bishop was there too, brought from detention to witness Grant's commitment to the promises he'd made. As Grant was processed into federal custody, Cole approached him one final time, his expression carrying something that might have been peace beneath the exhaustion. "The Foundation launched yesterday," Cole said quietly. "I saw the press conference. You actually told them everything about Michael, about the choices you made, about the systemic failures that created men like us." "I promised I would," Grant said simply. "My attorney says if I cooperate fully with the Eliza kidnapping prosecution and show genuine remorse, I might get 15 years instead of life. They're considering the circumstances, Michael's death, the grief, the way I became exactly what I was trying to fight against. You deserve the consideration. What you did was wrong, but the system that created the situation was broken long before you started planning revenge." Cole nodded slowly. "The Foundation. They offered me a position on the advisory board if I get early release for good behavior and cooperation. They want someone who actually lived through the systemic failures to help guide the advocacy work." "That's perfect," Grant said, genuine warmth in his voice despite the circumstances. "Michael would be proud of you, Cole. Not for the revenge, but for choosing to transform the grief into something that actually helps people. He'd be proud of you too, for finally admitting you were wrong and accepting consequences instead of just calculating your way out of accountability." Cole extended his hand awkward, given they were both in custody, but meaningful nonetheless. "I'm sorry it took this much destruction for both of us to figure out what actually matters." Grant shook Cole's hand, feeling decades of complicated history and shared trauma compress into that single gesture. "Me too. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes we have to break completely before we can rebuild something worth having." As federal marshals escorted Grant toward the detention area where he'd await formal sentencing, he looked back one more time and saw Audrey Dora and Vincent Krause in the courtroom gallery. Audrey was holding June's latest portrait, the one showing Grant walking toward prison with peace rather than fear on his face. June herself wasn't there. Krause had advised against bringing a child to federal court proceedings, but her presence was evident in the drawings Audrey held, in the foundation that now bore Michael Bishop's name, in the dozens of children who would receive help because Grant had finally chosen accountability over evasion. Grant Holloway was walking toward 15 to 20 years in federal prison, but for the first time in 30 years, he was walking toward something that mattered more than power or control or strategic advantage. He was walking toward being worthy of an 8-year-old orphan's trust, and that, Grant realized, was the only victory that actually counted. The federal sentencing hearing took place 6 months after Grant's voluntary surrender, a period during which he'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors to dismantle the criminal aspects of his operations while preserving the legitimate businesses and foundations he'd established. The courtroom was packed journalists, covering the unprecedented case of a major criminal operator voluntarily surrendering, federal agents who'd been tracking Grant for years, victims of his operations seeking acknowledgement of harm, and surprisingly, dozens of people whose lives had been positively impacted by the Michael Bishop Foundation. June sat in the gallery beside Audrey and Krause, her sketchpad balanced on her knees, capturing the proceedings with her characteristic intensity. Grant had asked that she not be required to testify. Her role as witness to Eliza's abduction was already documented through her drawings and police interviews, but June had insisted on being present for the sentencing. "I need to see that consequences happen," she'd told Audrey simply. "That people actually face what they've done." The prosecution presented their case first. 30 years of criminal operations ranging from money laundering to extortion to strategic violence that had resulted in at least 4 documented deaths. They showed evidence of Grant's calculated decisions, his careful construction of an empire built on exploitation and fear, his systematic use of vulnerable people as strategic assets. The weight of it was devastating. Even Grant, who'd provided much of the evidence himself, felt the full scope of his moral failures laid bare in clinical legal language. Then Grant's defense attorney rose, not to excuse the crimes but to contextualize them within broader systemic failures. She spoke about Grant's own background: foster care, institutional neglect, the lack of legitimate pathways to stability that had made criminal operations seem like survival rather than choice. She presented evidence of the foundation Grant had established, the compensation fund for victims, the cooperation that had helped dismantle larger criminal networks beyond Grant's personal operation. And she called character witnesses who spoke about Grant's transformation over the past 6 months. Audrey Dora testified about watching Grant choose accountability over evasion, protection over control, genuine care over strategic calculation. She spoke about June's safety and stability under the resources Grant had established, about the dozens of other children the foundation was already helping. Her voice was steady but emotional as she concluded. Mr. Holloway spent 30 years treating people as strategic assets. He's spent the last 6 months proving he's capable of treating them as human beings who matter beyond their utility. That transformation shouldn't erase his crimes, but it should inform how we think about justice and rehabilitation. Cole Bishop testified via video link from his own detention facility, where he was serving a 15-year sentence for Eliza's kidnapping. His testimony was brief but powerful. Grant Holloway made decisions that cost my brother his life. I spent 12 years planning revenge that ultimately harmed innocent people and turned me into the kind of person Michael would have been ashamed of. What I learned through that process is that punishment without transformation just perpetuates cycles of harm. Grant is accepting consequences while building something that actually honors the people he failed. That's more meaningful than revenge ever was. Finally, the judge asked if Grant wished to make a statement before sentencing. Grant rose slowly. His 6 months in pretrial detention evident in his physical appearance, but his emotional state somehow more stable than it had been during his years of freedom. Your Honor, I'm not going to stand here and claim that systemic failures excuse my choices. I made deliberate decisions to exploit vulnerable people, to prioritize power over humanity, to treat human lives as strategic calculations. I did that for 30 years. And the evidence presented by the prosecution is an accurate accounting of that harm. Grant's voice was steady, not asking for leniency but acknowledging truth. What I want to address is what happens next, not for me, but for the people still impacted by the systems that created men like me and the victims of operations like mine. Grant turned slightly to address the courtroom rather than just the judge. The Michael Bishop Foundation exists because I finally understood that acknowledging harm requires more than accepting punishment. It requires building alternatives to the systems that make criminal operations seem necessary for survival. The compensation fund exists because people I hurt deserve tangible accountability, not just my imprisonment. And the trust funds for children like June exist because breaking cycles of exploitation requires actually investing in vulnerable people rather than just using them. He paused, his eyes finding June in the gallery. 6 months ago, an 8-year-old orphan handed me a drawing and trusted me to act on the truth she'd witnessed. She'd been dismissed by every official channel, ignored by adults who should have protected her, and she still chose to believe that someone would actually listen. That trust, that desperate, courageous trust is the only reason I'm standing here accepting consequences, instead of using my resources to evade them. Because June deserved to be right about me, and the only way to honor that was to become the kind of man who actually faces what he's done. Grant's voice roughened slightly. So, Your Honor, I'm not asking for leniency or reduced sentencing based on my cooperation or the foundations I've established. I'm asking that the court recognize that justice can include both punishment and transformation, that holding me accountable and supporting the systems I've built to help others aren't mutually exclusive, and that the dozens of children who will benefit from resources I've established deserve to have those resources continue regardless of how severely I'm punished for the crimes I committed. The judge listened carefully, her expression giving nothing away. When Grant finished, she reviewed her notes for several long minutes before speaking. Mr. Holloway, this court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding your criminal operations and your cooperation with federal prosecutors. We've also reviewed evidence regarding the foundations and systems you've established to address harm caused by your decisions. What's clear from this record is that you've committed serious crimes that warrant substantial imprisonment. What's also clear is that your transformation over the past 6 months, while commendable, doesn't erase 30 years of calculated exploitation. Grant nodded, accepting the assessment. However, the judge continued, this court also recognizes that justice should consider both punishment and rehabilitation, both accountability and the possibility of meaningful change. The evidence suggests you've accepted responsibility not just through cooperation, but through tangible efforts to address systemic failures that contributed to your criminal choices and victimized others. She paused, looking directly at Grant. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison, with eligibility for early release after 12 years contingent on continued cooperation and demonstrated commitment to the foundations you've established. You will serve this sentence at a facility that allows you to continue participating in foundation oversight through authorized communications, ensuring that your imprisonment doesn't destroy the positive systems you've built. Grant felt something unclench in his chest, not relief at the specific sentence, but gratitude that the judge had recognized the complexity of justice rather than reducing it to simple punishment. Additionally, the judge said, this court is ordering that the Michael Bishop Foundation and related trusts be protected from asset forfeiture beyond what's necessary to compensate direct victims of your criminal operations. The dozens of children and families served by these resources should not be punished for your crimes by having those resources eliminated. The judge looked toward the gallery where June sat. Miss Foster, would you approach the bench, please? June stood carefully, her sketchpad clutched against her chest, and walked forward with Audrey beside her. She looked small and nervous, standing before the federal judge, but her spine was straight and her eyes were clear. Miss Foster, the judge said gently, you played a crucial role in bringing Mr. Holloway to justice, and in creating the circumstances that allowed him to choose accountability over evasion. This court wants to acknowledge your courage in continuing to seek truth even after multiple adults dismissed your observations. Your drawings and testimony helped rescue Eliza Romano and exposed serious criminal operations. How do you feel about the sentence this court has imposed? June was silent for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke in her quiet, steady voice. I think consequences and healing should both happen. Mr. Holloway hurt people, so he should go to prison. But he also built things that help people, so those things should continue. Both matter. That's a very wise perspective, the judge said. Do you feel safe with the guardianship arrangements that have been established? Yes, Audrey protects me. The trust provides for me. And Mr. Krause makes sure everything stays good even when Mr. Holloway can't be there. June paused, then added, Mr. Holloway taught me that telling truth has consequences but also creates change. He's living that now. That's what I needed to see. The judge nodded, clearly moved by June's mature understanding of complex moral questions. Thank you, Miss Foster. You may return to your seat. As June walked back to the gallery, she made eye contact with Grant one final time. She didn't smile, the moment was too serious for that, but she gave a small nod that communicated everything. Acknowledgement, respect, and the recognition that he'd actually followed through on the promises he'd made. The sentencing hearing concluded with logistical arrangements for Grant's transfer to the designated federal facility. As marshals prepared to escort him from the courtroom, Cole Bishop's attorney approached with a message from Cole. He wanted you to know that the foundation has received over $2 million in donations since the trial started. People are responding to the honesty about systemic failures and the commitment to actually addressing them. Michael's story is finally being told the way it deserved to be. Grant felt emotion tighten his throat. Tell Cole thank you, and tell him I hope he's finding his own path to healing inside. The attorney nodded and stepped back as the marshals guided Grant toward the exit. But before leaving the courtroom, Grant looked one more time at the gallery where June sat with her sketchpad, now drawing something new, probably the sentencing hearing, capturing this moment of accountability for whatever future reference she needed. That child had saved his life not by providing evidence, but by showing him what real courage looked like, by trusting him despite every reason not to, by believing he could become worthy of that trust even when he wasn't sure himself. Grant Holloway was walking toward 12 to 18 years in federal prison, but he was walking toward it with the knowledge that his imprisonment actually meant something, that justice and healing could coexist, that consequences and transformation weren't mutually exclusive, that accepting what he'd done was the only path to becoming someone worth the trust an 8-year-old Orphan had placed in him. The man who'd spent 30 years treating people as strategic assets was finally learning what it meant to value them as human beings. And that transformation, hard-won through devastating recognition of his failures, was the only redemption Grant would ever need. 18 months into Grant's sentence, June celebrated her 10th birthday in the apartment Audrey had established as their permanent home, a comfortable space in Brooklyn's Park Slope neighborhood, close to June's school, and far enough from Grant's former operation that no shadows of his criminal past touched their daily lives. The apartment walls were covered with June's drawings, portraits of her classmates, landscapes from the museum trips Audrey organized monthly, and occasionally, sketches of Grant from their supervised visits at the federal facility where he was serving his sentence. Audrey had transformed from museum program coordinator to full-time guardian and foundation director, splitting her time between caring for June and overseeing the Michael Bishop Foundation's expanding operations. The foundation now served over 200 families affected by criminal justice failures, providing everything from legal advocacy to educational resources to trauma counseling. Audrey's office was filled with thank you letters from people whose lives had been changed by resources Grant had established before his imprisonment. June thrived under Audrey's care in ways that would have been impossible in the group home system. She attended a private school that recognized and nurtured her artistic gifts, participated in therapy that helped her process the trauma of witnessing Eliza's abduction and the chaos that followed, and most importantly, experienced the kind of stable, loving environment that every child deserved but June had never known before. The monthly visits with Grant were part of June's routine now, third Saturday of every month. Audrey and June would drive to the federal facility and spend 2 hours in the supervised visiting area where inmates could maintain family connections. June always brought her sketch pad and spent portions of each visit drawing while they talked, her art capturing Grant's gradual transformation from the controlled, calculating man he'd been to someone more grounded and genuinely present. On this particular visiting day, 18 months into Grant's sentence, June had something specific she wanted to share. She'd been working on a special project for weeks, a comprehensive portfolio documenting the foundation's work, illustrated with her drawings of the families they'd helped. Each page told a story. A mother reunited with her child after criminal justice reform advocacy, a teenager receiving college scholarship funding, a family accessing trauma counseling after years of being unable to afford mental health support. Grant reviewed the portfolio with visible emotion, his hands gentle on pages that represented everything his imprisonment was supposed to achieve, tangible evidence that accepting consequences could coexist with creating positive change. "This is extraordinary, June," Grant said, his voice rough. "You've documented the Foundation's impact better than any formal report could." "It's for the annual fundraiser," June explained. "Audrey says donors respond better to stories with faces and real people, so I drew the real people." She flipped to a particular page, showing a young boy around her age receiving art supplies. "This is Marcus. He's in foster care like I was. The Foundation is paying for art classes so he can develop his skills instead of just surviving. That's exactly what the Foundation should be doing." Grant looked at June with pride that went beyond strategic satisfaction. "You've become an essential part of making this work, June, not just through your initial courage in exposing Cole, but through your continued commitment to helping others." June was quiet for a moment, her charcoal moving across a fresh page in her sketchpad. "Do you regret it? Accepting consequences and going to prison instead of running or fighting the charges?" Grant considered the question carefully. "I regret the 30 years of choices that made prison necessary. But accepting consequences? No, that's the only decision I've made in my entire life that I'm genuinely proud of. Because it means you were right about me, June. You trusted that I could become someone worth that trust, and I was terrified of proving you wrong. You didn't prove me wrong." June's drawing was taking shape, a portrait of Grant, but different from earlier sketches. This version showed less internal conflict, more settled peace. "You proved that people can change if they're willing to face what they've done. Cole learned that too. He wrote to me last month." Grant's eyebrows rose. "Cole wrote to you?" "Through Audrey. He said he's working with the Foundation from inside his facility, helping design advocacy programs based on his experience with the criminal justice system. He said he's sorry for putting me in danger with his revenge plan, and he's grateful I helped him understand that healing matters more than revenge." "That sounds like real growth from Cole." Grant smiled slightly. "I'm glad he's found a way to honor Michael's memory through positive work, instead of destructive revenge." June flipped to another page where she'd drawn Cole Bishop in his current state, older, tired, but with less of the predatory hardness that had defined him during his years of planning revenge. Beneath the portrait, June had written, "Broken people can heal if they choose. Both Grant and Cole chose healing." "Is this for your school project?" Grant asked, recognizing the care June had put into the composition. "It's for my therapy portfolio, Doctor. William says I should document my understanding of what happened, not just the trauma of seeing Eliza taken, but the whole story of how broken people made choices that hurt others but then chose accountability and healing." June's voice was matter of fact. She says my experience is unusual because most kids who witness crimes don't get to see the perpetrators actually face consequences and transform. Usually there's just trauma, and then the adult disappears into the system. Your Dr. Williams is very wise. Grant felt gratitude for the therapy June was receiving, for the space to process complex moral questions that most adults struggled with. Does it help, having the full story instead of just the traumatic parts? Yes, because it means the scary thing that happened wasn't meaningless. It led to consequences and change, and the foundation that helps people. June set down her charcoal and met Grant's eyes directly. You going to prison is part of what makes me feel safe, because it means justice actually happened, that people face what they've done. If you'd avoided consequences, I would have learned that power matters more than truth, but you didn't avoid them. So I learned that truth matters even when it costs everything. Grant closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of June's words. That's exactly what I needed you to learn. Not that I'm perfect or that I've erased my mistakes, but that facing truth and accepting consequences is possible even when it's terrifying. They spent the rest of the visit discussing June's school progress, Audrey's work with the foundation, and the upcoming anniversary event where June's portfolio would be displayed. Grant shared updates about his own prison experience, the education programs he was participating in, the restorative justice circle where inmates confronted their crimes in structured dialogue with victims, the ways he was trying to use his time productively, rather than just marking years until release. When the visit ended, June did something she'd never done before. She handed Grant a drawing she'd made specifically for him to keep. The image showed the moment at the museum when June had first approached him, both of them captured in that instant of desperate trust, meeting unexpected receptivity. Beneath it, June had written, "The moment everything changed for both of us. Keep this," June said, "to remember that change is possible, that broken people can rebuild if they choose healing over revenge or power." Grant accepted the drawing with trembling hands, knowing he'd treasure it more than any possession he'd accumulated during 30 years of empire building. "Thank you, June, for everything, for trusting me, for showing me what real courage looks like, for giving me a reason to become someone better than who I was." "You're welcome." June's small hand squeezed his briefly, before Audrey gently indicated it was time to leave. "And Grant, when you get out, when you've served your time and earned early release, I want you to speak at Foundation events, to tell your story so other people understand that accountability and transformation both matter." "I will," Grant promised. "If the Foundation still wants me involved after everything, I'll do whatever helps others avoid the mistakes I made." As Audrey and June left the visiting area, Grant watched them go, this guardian and child who'd somehow become his family despite the prison walls and criminal history that should have made genuine connection impossible. June turned back once at the doorway, giving a small wave that communicated everything their relationship had become. Not strategic asset and operator, but human beings who'd saved each other through choosing truth over expedience. Grant returned to his cell with June's drawing, carefully protected in a folder he'd designated for precious items, letters from Foundation beneficiaries, progress reports from Audrey, and now this portrait of the moment that had transformed his entire life. His cellmate, a man serving time for white-collar financial crimes, noticed the care Grant took with the drawing. "Family?" the cellmate asked. "Yeah," Grant said, the word feeling right in ways it never had before. "Family. Not the one I was born into or the one I tried to build through criminal operations. The one I was broken to find but rebuilt through accepting consequences and choosing healing." He pinned June's drawing to the wall where he could see it every morning, a reminder that 18 months into a 12 to 18-year sentence, his imprisonment was accomplishing exactly what it should, protecting society from his past choices while creating space for genuine transformation. Grant Holloway had been many things over 30 years: strategic criminal operator, exploitative employer, man who'd sacrificed vulnerable people for operational efficiency, but here, in a federal prison cell, surrounded by evidence of the family he'd found through being broken, he was becoming something else entirely. A man who valued truth over power, a man who chose accountability over evasion, a man who understood that healing required facing what you'd done rather than running from it, and most importantly, a man who'd been trusted by an 8-year-old orphan and spent every day since trying to become worthy of that trust. That was the only identity that mattered anymore. 4 years and 3 months into Grant's sentence, on a crisp October afternoon that painted Brooklyn in shades of amber and rust, June sat in the Foundation's community center working on her most ambitious drawing yet. At 12 years old, she'd evolved from a traumatized child with extraordinary observational skills into a confident young artist whose work was being recognized in youth galleries across the city. But this particular drawing wasn't for exhibition or school portfolios, it was personal. The image taking shape across the oversized paper showed 4 people in the Foundation's main office. Audrey Dora at her desk, surrounded by case files and grateful letters from families they'd helped. Vincent Krause in the corner, his protective stillness now applied to watching over the dozens of vulnerable people who passed through the Foundation's doors monthly. Eliza Romano, now 18, and serving as a youth advocate for the Foundation, speaking with a young mother whose child had been caught in the criminal justice system. And at the center of the composition, June herself, sketchpad balanced on her knees, capturing the scene exactly as it existed in this moment. But the drawing also included a fifth figure, rendered in lighter charcoal that suggested memory rather than physical presence. Grant Holloway, standing behind June's shoulder, his expression carrying the peace that came from accepting consequences while building something meaningful. He wasn't actually there. Grant wouldn't be eligible for early release for another 8 years, but his presence was evident in every aspect of the Foundation's work. Every family helped, every life changed through resources he'd established before his imprisonment. Audrey looked up from the case file she was reviewing and noticed June's drawing taking shape. "Is that for the anniversary event?" "It's for Grant," June said without looking up from her work. "For his parole review next month. I want the board to see what his accountability created, not just punishment, but actual transformation that helps people." "You think a drawing will impact a federal parole board?" "I think showing them tangible evidence of how his acceptance of consequences led to systems that actually work might matter more than just arguing about good behavior in prison." June's charcoal added shading to Eliza's figure. "Besides, Dr. Williams says documentation helps people understand complex stories. This is documentation of what justice plus healing actually looks like." Eliza finished her conversation with the young mother and crossed to where June was working, her curiosity evident. Over the past 4 years, Eliza had transformed from traumatized kidnapping victim to passionate advocate for criminal justice reform, partially because her rescue had come through June's courage, partially because the Foundation provided space for her to process trauma through helping others experiencing similar situations. "Can I see?" Eliza asked, peering over June's shoulder. Her breath caught when she recognized the composition. "June, that's beautiful. You've captured all of us exactly as we are. That's the point, to show that what started with broken people and terrible choices became something that actually helps families instead of destroying them." June gestured to the lighter charcoal figure of Grant. "He's not physically here, but his accountability made all of this possible. Both matter, the prison time and the positive impact." Krause appeared in the doorway with his characteristic silent approach, though June had long since learned to track his presence even when he moved soundlessly. The former contractor had become the Foundation's unofficial security director and June's secondary guardian, his protective instincts now channeled into keeping vulnerable families safe, rather than extracting endangered witnesses. "You're drawing Grant again," Krause observed, not quite a question. "I draw what matters," June replied simply. "Grant matters because he proved people can change if they choose healing over revenge or evasion. Cole matters for the same reason he's running the prisoner advocacy program from inside his facility now. Both of them made terrible choices but then chose accountability. That's worth documenting." Krause studied the drawing with his professional assessment, noting the care June had taken to show each person's essential nature. "The parole board meets in 3 weeks. You want me to submit this as part of Grant's clemency package?" "Yes. Along with the impact reports showing how many families we've helped, the letters from people whose lives changed because of Foundation resources, and the evidence that Grant's cooperation led to dismantling larger criminal networks." June's voice carried determination beyond her 12 years. "The board needs to see that early release isn't about rewarding Grant. It's about allowing someone who's genuinely transformed to contribute more directly to the systems he helped build." Over the next 3 weeks, June refined the drawing until it captured not just the physical reality of the Foundation's work, but the emotional truth of what transformation looked like when accountability and healing coexisted. She added small details that told larger stories. A child's artwork on Audrey's desk from a family receiving services, case files marked with successful outcomes, a memorial photo of Michael Bishop whose death had catalyzed everything that followed. The parole hearing took place via video conference, allowing Grant to participate from the federal facility while the board reviewed his case from their offices in Washington. June, Audrey, and Krause attended in person, armed with documentation of Grant's transformation and the Foundation's impact. The board chair, a severe woman with decades of experience evaluating criminal rehabilitation, reviewed Grant's file with practiced neutrality. "Mr. Holloway, you've served 4 years and 3 months of a 12 to 18-year sentence for extensive criminal operations spanning 3 decades. Your cooperation with federal prosecutors has been exemplary, and the evidence shows genuine acceptance of responsibility. However, Early release requires more than good behavior, it requires demonstrated transformation that suggests reduced risk to public safety. Can you speak to that? Grant, appearing on screen from the facility's video room, had aged visibly during his imprisonment but carried himself with more genuine peace than he'd shown during his years of freedom. Your Honor, I won't claim that 4 years erases 30 years of calculated exploitation and harm, but I can speak to what I've learned through accepting consequences rather than evading them. He paused, gathering thoughts he'd clearly been preparing. Before prison, I treated people as strategic assets, calculated their value based on utility, protected them only insofar as that protection served operational needs, and justified exploitation through efficiency and power. The 8-year-old girl who exposed my betrayer trusted me to be better than that, and initially, I protected her because her evidence was useful. But somewhere in the process of actually facing what I'd done, of acknowledging the Michael Bishops and other sacrificed lives my operations created, I learned that genuine protection requires surrendering control, not exercising it. Grant's eyes found June through the screen. June Foster saved my life not by providing evidence, but by showing me what real courage looks like. Choosing truth even when every adult dismissed her. Trusting someone to act with integrity when she had zero evidence that trust was warranted, and believing I could become worthy of that trust when I wasn't sure myself. The foundation I established before imprisonment exists because June forced me to confront the difference between exploitation and actual care. The board chair made notes, her expression unreadable. Miss Foster is here today with documentation of the foundation's impact. Miss Foster, would you like to address the board? June stood carefully, her presentation folder held with both hands, and approached the microphone with Audrey beside her for support. I'm June Foster. 4 years ago, I witnessed an abduction and gave Mr. Holloway the drawing that exposed his betrayer. Today, I'm asking you to consider early release not because Mr. Holloway has served enough time, but because the systems he established before imprisonment prove that accountability and contribution can coexist. She opened the folder and displayed her drawing of the Foundation's work. This shows what Mr. Holloway's acceptance of consequences created. Over 300 families served, $12 million in direct assistance provided, advocacy that's changed state-level policies around criminal justice reform. His imprisonment matters because it proves justice happened. His early release would matter because it allows someone who's genuinely transformed to contribute more directly to fixing the systems that created people like him. The board members leaned forward to examine June's documentation, their professional assessment clearly impacted by the visual evidence of transformation, rather than just statistical reports and testimony. Another board member spoke up, an older man with kind eyes. Miss Foster, you were victimized by Mr. Holloway's betrayer and endangered by the criminal operations he ran. Do you feel safe with the prospect of his early release? Yes, June said without hesitation. Because Mr. Holloway's protection of me now is different from what it was initially. At first, he protected me because my evidence was useful. Now he protects me because he understands I'm a human being who deserves stability regardless of my utility. That difference is everything. And you believe that transformation is genuine, not strategic positioning for early release? I believe it's genuine because Mr. Holloway accepted an 18-year sentence when he could have fought for less. I believe it's genuine because he established Foundation resources that continue regardless of his involvement. I believe it's genuine because he's told me directly that if I wanted him to have zero contact after release, he'd respect that boundary, even though it would hurt. June's voice was steady. People who are strategically positioning don't give up control like that. People who've genuinely transformed do. The board reviewed additional documentation. Letters from Foundation beneficiaries describing how resources had changed their lives. Testimony from federal prosecutors confirming Grant's extensive cooperation. Psychological evaluations showing genuine remorse and behavioral change. And impact reports demonstrating that the Foundation's work had expanded exponentially since Grant's imprisonment, rather than collapsing without his direct oversight. Finally, the board chair addressed Grant directly via video. Mr. Holloway, if this board grants early release, what would your role be with the Michael Bishop Foundation and the families it serves? Whatever role serves them best, Grant said simply. If the board determines I should maintain distance to avoid re-traumatizing victims or compromising the Foundation's legitimacy, I'll respect that completely. If the board determines I can contribute through public speaking about accountability and transformation, I'll do that. My release isn't about reclaiming power or control, it's about continuing to face consequences while contributing to systems that actually help people. The Foundation's leadership decides my involvement, not me. The board went into closed deliberation for 45 minutes while June, Audrey, and Kraus waited in tense silence. June used the time to add final details to her drawing, small touches that captured the hope underlying the entire proceeding. The possibility that justice and healing could coexist even in systems designed primarily for punishment. When the board returned, the chair's expression gave nothing away. "Mr. Holloway, this board has reviewed your case extensively and consulted with the federal prosecutors who worked with you on dismantling criminal networks. We've also reviewed the substantial evidence of the Michael Bishop Foundation's impact and the testimony of individuals affected by your crimes and your subsequent accountability." Grant sat absolutely still on screen, his expression prepared for either outcome. "This board is granting conditional early release effective 60 days from today, contingent on the following terms. You will serve 5 years of supervised probation during which you maintain employment with legitimate enterprises only. You will continue monthly meetings with a parole officer who will monitor your activities and ensure compliance with all legal requirements. You will have zero contact with any known criminal operators or organizations. And you will participate in ongoing restorative justice programs where you engage directly with victims of operations similar to yours who seek understanding and accountability." The chair paused. "Additionally, your involvement with the Michael Bishop Foundation will be determined by the Foundation's independent board of directors, rather than your personal preference. If they determine your direct participation would be beneficial, you may contribute under supervised conditions. If they determine maintaining distance better serves their mission, you will respect that determination without appeal." Grant's eyes closed briefly, emotion visible even through the video screen. "Thank you, Your Honor. I accept all conditions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate that transformation can continue outside prison walls." June felt Audrey's hand squeeze her shoulder, felt Kraus's steady presence behind them, and understood that this moment represented something larger than just one man's early release. It represented the possibility that criminal justice could include both accountability and rehabilitation, that people who'd caused harm could face consequences while building systems that prevented future harm, that justice and healing weren't mutually exclusive concepts but complementary aspects of genuine transformation. 60 days later, on a December morning cold enough to frost the Brooklyn streets, June and Audrey waited outside the federal facility's release processing area. Grant emerged at exactly 8 a.m., carrying only a small bag of personal possessions and wearing civilian clothes that looked strange after 4 years of institutional uniforms. He looked older, more grounded, and paradoxically more vulnerable than he'd ever appeared during his years of running criminal operations. June had prepared for this moment carefully. She'd drawn a welcome home card showing the Foundation's community center with space for Grant's figure to be added once he'd determined what role the board wanted him to play. She'd also written a letter explaining her feelings about his release, processing complex emotions with Dr. Williams's guidance until she understood what she wanted to say. But when Grant actually stood before them, free for the first time in over 4 years, June found she didn't need prepared words or drawings. She simply walked forward and wrapped her arms around his waist in a fierce hug that communicated everything their relationship had become. Not strategic operator and witness, but family forged through choosing truth over expedience and healing over revenge. "Welcome home," June said quietly. "To the family you were broken to find, but built with the pieces of your shattered past." Grant returned the embrace with trembling hands, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for never giving up on me, June. Thank you for showing me what it means to be worthy of trust." Audrey approached with her characteristic protective warmth, extending a hand that Grant shook with visible gratitude. "The Foundation Board met yesterday. They've approved your participation as a public speaker and advocate, sharing your story at fundraising events and policy conferences. But Grant, you report to me as executive director, not the other way around. The Foundation exists to serve families, not to rehabilitate your reputation. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear," Grant said, a slight smile touching his lips. "And Audrey? Thank you for caring for June the way she deserved all along, for giving her the stability and love that I initially tried to provide through strategic calculation rather than genuine connection." "You're welcome. But Grant, I did it for June, not for you. Don't forget that distinction." "I won't." Grant looked between them, these two people who'd become his family despite every reason they shouldn't trust him. "So what happens now?" "Now we go to the Foundation's anniversary celebration," June said, pulling out her completed drawing, the one showing all of them in the community center, with Grant's figure now fully rendered in present tense rather than memory. "And we show people what justice plus healing actually looks like when accountability and transformation both happen." The Foundation's 5th anniversary event took place in a venue that would have been impossible to imagine when Grant first established the initial trust funds from his detention cell. A large community space filled with families whose lives had been changed by Foundation resources, advocates working on criminal justice reform, and supporters who believed that people who'd caused harm could contribute to systems that prevented future harm. June's artwork was displayed throughout the venue, her documentation of the Foundation's work, her portraits of families served, and most prominently, her original sketch of Cole Bishop that had started everything. The sketch now hung in a frame with explanatory text describing how an 8-year-old's courage to speak truth to power had catalyzed a series of transformations that ultimately helped hundreds of people. Grant spoke briefly during the program, his testimony carefully prepared to center victims' experiences rather than his own rehabilitation. He talked about Michael Bishop and the systemic failures that made criminal operations seem necessary, about the choices he'd made that harmed vulnerable people, and about the learning that could only happen through accepting consequences rather than evading them. "I spent 30 years treating people as strategic assets," Grant said, his voice carrying across the crowded venue. "I justified exploitation through efficiency, protected people only when it served operational needs, and calculated human value based on utility. That approach built an empire, but it also destroyed lives, traumatized families, and perpetuated exactly the systemic failures I claimed to be navigating pragmatically." He paused, his eyes finding June in the front row. "An 8-year-old girl named June Foster changed that by doing something extraordinary. She trusted me to be better than my track record suggested. She handed me a drawing and expected me to act with integrity, despite having zero evidence that expectation was warranted. And that trust, that desperate, courageous trust forced me to confront the difference between protection and exploitation, between accountability and evasion, between power and genuine transformation." Grant gestured to the displays showing the Foundation's impact. "This foundation exists because June showed me what real courage looks like, because Cole Bishop learned that revenge doesn't heal grief, accountability and contribution do, because dozens of people believed that criminal justice could include both punishment and rehabilitation, both consequences and healing. Every family served by this foundation, every life changed through these resources, every policy reformed through this advocacy. That's what happens when people choose truth over expedience and transformation over revenge." The applause was genuine rather than polite, recognition that Grant's words carried hard-won wisdom rather than strategic positioning. After the formal program concluded, people approached him with questions about his experience, with stories of their own struggles with criminal justice systems, with gratitude for the Foundation's impact on their families. June watched Grant navigate these conversations with a different kind of skill than he'd demonstrated during his criminal career. Genuine listening rather than strategic calculation, humility about his ongoing learning rather than projection of authority, acknowledgement of victims rather than focus on his own rehabilitation. This was transformation in action, she realized. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine and ongoing. Late in the evening, as the event wound down and families began departing with Foundation resource packets and renewed hope, June found Grant standing alone near the display of her original sketches. He was studying the drawing of Cole Bishop, the portrait that had shattered his world and ultimately saved both of them. "You kept it," June said, joining him. "After everything, you kept my drawing of the man who betrayed you. It's the most important drawing you've ever made," Grant said quietly. Not because it exposed Cole, but because it represented the moment when someone finally believed truth mattered more than power. "That sketch is the reason I'm standing here free instead of serving 14 more years. The reason the Foundation exists instead of my assets being frozen in federal forfeiture. The reason transformation became possible instead of just punishment happening." June studied her own work with critical assessment. "I could draw it better now. My technique has improved a lot in 4 years. The technique doesn't matter. The courage does." Grant turned to face June fully. "You drew what you saw even though every adult dismissed you. You approached a dangerous stranger because your instinct said truth mattered more than safety. And you trusted that stranger, to become worthy of that trust, even when he wasn't sure himself. That courage saved multiple lives, June, including mine." "You saved yourself by choosing accountability," June corrected gently. "I just gave you the information. You decided what to do with it." "We saved each other," Grant said. "You showed me what transformation could look like. I showed you that adults could actually listen and act on truth instead of dismissing it. And together with Audrey and Krause and Cole and everyone else who chose healing over revenge or evasion, we built something that actually helps people, instead of just perpetuating cycles of harm." June pulled out her sketch pad, always present, always documenting, and flipped to the final drawing she'd completed that morning. The image showed all of them together. June, Audrey, Krause, Eliza, Grant, and in lighter charcoal suggesting memory rather than presence, Cole Bishop and Michael Bishop. They were positioned in the Foundation's community center, surrounded by the families they'd helped, with light breaking through windows that had once seemed impossibly barred. Beneath the image, June had written in her careful lettering, "This is what family looks like. Not perfect, not simple, but chosen, rebuilt from broken pieces, held together by truth and accountability and healing." Grant read the words and felt something complete inside him, not the satisfaction of accomplished strategy, but the peace that came from finally valuing people over operations, truth over power, healing over revenge. "That's beautiful, June," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And accurate. This is family, the one I was broken to find, but rebuilt through the pieces of my shattered past." "It's our family," June corrected. "All of us. Broken people who chose healing, who faced consequences, who built something better than what came before." She closed the sketch pad and looked up at Grant with those dark, perceptive eyes that had seen too much trauma but never lost their fundamental belief in truth. "And Grant, when I grow up and become a real artist, when museums show my work instead of just community centers and youth galleries, this is the story I'm going to tell. About an 8-year-old orphan, and a mafia boss, and a betrayer, and a protector, and all the broken people who chose accountability over revenge. About the family we built from shattered trust and careful healing. About the moment when truth mattered more than power, and everything changed." "That's a story worth telling," Grant agreed. "And I'm honored to be part of it. Even the broken, guilty parts that required consequences and transformation." They stood together in the community center that Grant's accountability had built, surrounded by evidence that justice and healing could coexist, that people who'd caused harm could contribute to preventing future harm, that family wasn't about blood or strategy but about choosing each other despite every reason not to. The 8-year-old orphan who'd sketched the man who stole Eliza had become a 2-year-old artist documenting transformation. The mafia boss who'd been broken by intimate betrayal had become a man worthy of the trust placed in him, and together with Audrey's fierce protection, Krause's steady vigilance, Eliza's passionate advocacy, and Cole's hard-won understanding that revenge doesn't heal, they'd built something that actually mattered. A family forged not through blood or calculation, but through choosing truth over expedience, accountability over evasion, and healing over revenge. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't simple, but it was real and chosen, and absolutely worth every devastating moment that had been required to build it. June Foster had handed Grant Holloway a sketch at a museum gala 4 years ago, and that sketch, that desperate act of courage from a dismissed child, had saved multiple lives and built a family that would endure long after the criminal empires and strategic calculations faded into irrelevant history. Because truth always mattered more than power, and healing always mattered more than revenge. And family, real family, chosen family, family built from broken pieces, always mattered most of all. If you felt something while watching, please subscribe. That's how I know these stories mean something to you, even on your TV. Take a second to join our community of story lovers. Your support keeps this world of emotions alive.